Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of the Foster family. Christopher Foster had always been considered a success. His mother, Enid, described him as someone who actively pursued financial opportunities from an early age. Along with his younger brother, Andrew, he aspired to follow in the footsteps of their late father, who had been a sales manager. Although they both aimed to become successful businessmen, Chris and Andrew had had a tense relationship since they were children. Andrew later explained that Chris's confidence and assertiveness had overshadowed Andrew's quiet nature. Despite this, both brothers were very close to their mother, Enid. In 1987, Chris married Jill, a housewife, and they had their daughter Kirstie in 1993. Chris's path to wealth began in the late 80s when he worked as a mattress salesman and used inexpensive pizza boxes for insulation. His life changed dramatically after he founded a successful engineering company. This business made Chris a self-made millionaire through the development of an innovative insulation material that became essential in the oil industry. The Piper Alpha oil rig explosion on July 6, 1988, had led to a catastrophic fire that lasted for days and claimed the lives of 167 people. After watching the news, Chris saw an opportunity in this tragedy and identified a market niche for fireproof insulation specifically for oil and gas rigs. Although many oil companies showed interest, they wanted certification of the product's effectiveness before signing a contract. To prove its value, Chris took the financial risk of mortgaging his house to fund an experiment. The test was successful. His product, overshadowed, showed exceptional resilience compared to other insulation materials when exposed to fire. It even received a rare A1 fire test rating. Major oil companies quickly placed orders, making Christopher Foster a millionaire almost overnight. Reports suggested that he earned so much money that he didn't know how to spend it all. As his business grew, Christopher's annual turnover increased significantly from £50,000 to £1 million. By 2004, Chris's net worth had been reported to be £10 million. That same year, his wife Jill noticed a house in Shropshire Life magazine. It was Asbaston House, a beautiful mansion in Maesbrook, a wealthy village in Shropshire, England. The estate was 16 acres in size, had its own lake and equestrian grounds. Despite being offered at around £1.5 million, the house still needed repairs. Jill was so intrigued that Chris made an offer the next morning. Foster's family quickly sold their house and moved to Asbaston House. Chris then invested a further £50,000 to install a swimming pool and landscape the property. After settling down, Chris led a lavish lifestyle. He bought 2 Porsches, one for himself and one for Jill, a James Bond-style Aston Martin, Range Rovers, and many other vehicles. Their daughter Kirstie attended a private boarding school and Chris also bought her several horses. Kirstie spent time with her horses when not at school and participated in equestrian competitions. Friends described her as quiet, thoughtful, and kind. In addition, Chris also bought 4 dogs and several pigeons. He further enhanced their lives by hiring a butler and a personal assistant, and the house had antique furniture worth more than £200,000. Chris's most expensive hobby was his passion for shooting, demonstrated by his expensive gun collection, each costing between £12,000 and £12,500, equivalent to nearly $20,000 at the time. Chris often attended shooting parties that could last 3 days, with bills running up to £8,000. He had a habit of leaving guns around the house. Occasionally, when pigeons made a mess of Chris's car, he would shoot them, much to Jill's frustration. In one disturbing incident, when Kirstie's black Labrador began disturbing the sheep, Chris was unable to control the dog and led it down a country road to shoot it in the head. Chris was a successful businessman but lacked a long-term vision. Notoriously impulsive, he craved instant gratification and was quick to cut ties with people who annoyed him. Chris enjoyed being admired and envied by others for his wealth, and social status was very important to him. Over time, both Chris and Jill moved up the social ladder, and it became clear to those close to Chris that he wanted to move away from his roots in Wolverhampton. Jill enjoyed shopping sprees and spent her days doing self-care activities like nail and hair appointments, along with beauty treatments like manicures and Botox injections. Chris and his family regularly went on luxury vacations, staying in luxury hotels and enjoying the best food. These lavish trips could sometimes cost up to £20,000 each, and Chris didn't hesitate to pay. However, unbeknownst to his friends and family, Chris had reached his financial limit and began withdrawing money from his business. His excessive spending had led to financial imbalance, with more money going out than coming in. In 2003, Chris had signed an exclusive contract with DRC, giving them the exclusive rights to produce his oil rig sealant. By 2004, his net worth had been reported to be £1 million. However, by 2005, he owed £2.8 million. Instead of cutting costs, Chris, due to his lavish spending habits, sought more money from other sources. Despite the exclusive agreement with DRC, he signed another contract with another company to sell his products. DRC discovered this infringement and sued Chris, resulting in a lawsuit and DRC acquiring Chris's patent. Chris went bankrupt, and in 2007, his company was dissolved. His assets worth £3 million were frozen and his salary was gone. Despite serious financial troubles, Chris continued to act as if nothing significant had happened. At the same time, Chris became involved in a dispute with his accountant, who reported him to the Inland Revenue for tax evasion. Chris had failed to pay VAT, national insurance, and various other taxes. To deal with his increasing tax obligations, he had to borrow from banks to ease his financial strain. In addition, he had mortgaged the Osbaston house 3 times and withdrawn money from more than 20 different bank accounts. Despite his lavish lifestyle and constant spending, Chris still tried to hide the fact that he was deeply in debt. Chris gradually found himself struggling with overwhelming challenges, aware that time was ticking away and fearful of losing everything. However, during a conversation with a friend about houses, Chris insisted that he would never sell Osbaston house. Struggling with the pressure to maintain his flashy and knowing that his time and money were running out, Chris repeatedly sought professional help. He confided in the doctor, revealing his feelings of depression and suicidal thoughts. He started taking antidepressants. In August 2008, Chris came across a letter from his house managers posted on the front gate. The letter reported that they planned to return the following Tuesday to reclaim the house and other assets. The housekeeper said that when she showed Chris the letter, Chris appeared confused but remained silent. The nightmare that Chris had been avoiding had now become a harsh reality. He was on the brink of losing all his material possessions. The thought of Kirstie and Jill losing their familiar lifestyle was unbearable for Christopher. His family faced the possibility of returning to Wolverhampton, saying goodbye to their lavish lifestyle. For a proud man like Chris, such a situation would have been extremely humiliating. On August 21, 2008, a friend contacted Chris via text message to ask about his health, and he replied, "Not good, things are about to happen to me." On August 25, 2008, the Foster's family received an invitation to a barbecue and clay pigeon shooting event. They then joined the gathering. None of the attendees noticed any signs of difficulty in the Fosters. Witnesses recalled that Chris appeared happy. Their family still exuded happiness without knowing what Chris had planned that night. Chris informed Jill that he wanted to leave the gathering. Although Jill wanted to stay a little longer, they eventually left around 8:30 p.m., arriving home just a few minutes later at 8:44 p.m., their route captured by home security footage. Soon after, Jill went to bed. At 11:30 p.m., Chris went upstairs to check on Kirstie, urging her to go to bed while continuing to text a friend online. Around midnight, Chris decided to turn off the internet, causing Kirstie to end her conversation with her friend and go to bed. At 3 a.m., Chris began his violent rampage. He entered Jill's room and used a silencer to shoot her in the head while she was sleeping. Next, he went to Kirstie's room and killed her in the same way. Home security cameras recorded Chris's actions as he carried a shotgun outside the dog cage, killing each dog with a shot to the head. He then went to the stables and killed the horses before burning the stables with the animals inside. Chris appeared expressionless in the video. To prevent firefighters from reaching the house, Chris blocked the main entrance, shooting at the tires to make movement more difficult. He also pumped 200 liters of oil from the family's tank into the house's basement through connecting pipes. It is clear that Chris took deliberate steps to completely destroy the Osbaston house. His actions appeared to have been motivated by a desire to prevent others from acquiring property that he could not keep. Chris burned down his house and covered his car and belongings in oil. The fire quickly spread and destroyed everything. Chris, still carrying a rifle, went back into the house and lay down next to Jill's body in the bedroom, holding her as flames engulfed them. At 4:11 a.m., the security cameras stopped working. A neighbor saw the growing fire and called for help. Firefighters quickly arrived. The fire was too intense and difficult to control. As firefighters tried to put out the fire, neighbors watched the building burn, worried for those inside. In the following days, the media called in to search for Foster's family, but all efforts were unsuccessful. Because of Chris's wealth, the authorities opened an investigation, initially suspecting that the Foster family had been kidnapped. However, at the time, neither the bodies nor the security footage were found, so many speculated about what might have happened to them. It took 3 days for the fire to be completely extinguished. After the fire was extinguished, investigators carefully examined the house and found the bodies of Jill and Christopher on beds in a room that had collapsed into the living room. However, there was no sign of Kirstie. While some hoped she could have escaped, others feared she had been kidnapped. Sadly, Kirstie's remains were found in the rubble a few days later. Investigators used a brush to carefully collect her remains into a hearse. A fragment of Kirstie's skull revealed that she had suffered a gunshot wound to the head, like her mother. After examining the body, the police began to suspect that Chris had committed a crime. At the same time, they began investigating his financial situation. When they dug deeper, they discovered that Chris, a seemingly successful businessman, was actually heavily in debt. His total debt had reached £4 million, and when creditors tried to take his assets, they discovered that Chris had intended to demolish the house to ensure that there was nothing left for them to take. Security footage confirmed the police's suspicions. Chris committed the murders and took his own life without leaving any explanation or warning. Speculation about the motives behind the brutal crime led to 2 main theories. One theory had suggested that Chris, feeling ashamed of having lost his fortune, chose to commit the heinous act to avoid admitting his failures. Another theory had proposed that Chris, being self-centered, decided to destroy everything rather than face the possibility of loss. However, Enid had disagreed with these theories. She had firmly believed that Chris acted out of love for his family, trying to protect them from financial ruin. She had defended him and felt a deep sense of sympathy for his situation. In contrast, Chris's brother Andrew had held a very different view. Despite not speaking for 16 years, Andrew had briefly considered reconciling with Chris for their mother's sake. However, his fear of a hostile encounter had kept him from reaching out. Andrew had alleged that Chris had bullied and sexually assaulted him during their childhood, leading to a tumultuous relationship. Andrew had maintained that Chris exhibited bullying and controlling behavior. Andrew's attempts to reconcile with Chris in 1999 had been met with resistance. Chris had responded to Andrew's letter with a demand for a written apology, stating that Andrew would have to beg and scrape on bended knee to make amends. Andrew had believed that Chris refused to acknowledge his past wrongdoings and instead held on to long-standing grudges. For months after the tragedy, on December 19, 2008, a joint funeral had been held for 15-year-old Kirstie and 49-year-old Jill at their local village church. The service had been quiet and respectful, attended by close friends and family. Both Kirstie and Jill had been buried in the same plot, as requested by Jill's family. Chris had received a private funeral and was buried elsewhere. In the years following the tragedy, the remains of the burnt-out house and the family's charred belongings had been left on the site. These had included Kirstie's first aid book for her horses and a handwritten note detailing the family's meal plans for the week of the tragedy. The ruins of the house had remained until 2011 when the debris had been cleared. The 16-acre estate had been sold in 2014, with plans to build a new 6-bedroom house. Although the property had been put up for sale in 2012, it had taken 2 years to sell, reportedly after the price had been reduced. The reasons behind Christopher Foster's actions may have been financial struggles and the pressure to maintain a wealthy image. However, this had not justified the horrific outcome. Instead of having made sensible financial decisions or confiding in his loved ones, Chris had chosen a destructive path that had had devastating consequences for everyone involved. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Alicia Canales McGuire. On September 20th, 2017, around 1:55 a.m., a series of events unfolded in Everett, Washington. Multiple people dialed 911 after being startled by loud bangs. 10 minutes after the initial calls, police officers arrived at the scene, where they were met with a horrific sight. 24-year-old Alicia Canales McGuire lay dead on the doorstep, just outside the door. Investigators cracked this heartbreaking case thanks to social media and CCTV footage. Born on October 29, 1992 in Mount Vernon, Washington, Alicia was the daughter of Manuel and Michelle Canales. Throughout her adult life, she worked as a caregiver, driven by her passion for helping others. Raised on a farm, Alicia started working at the age of 5, which instilled in her the value of hard work. She often returned to the family farm to lend a hand. Alicia cherished family time, regularly visiting and speaking with her loved ones, never failing to express her love when bidding them farewell. Alicia lived in Birdsview with her husband Bradley. The couple got married in a beautiful beach ceremony at Deception Pass in July 2017. However, the investigators soon discovered that Alicia didn't reside in the house where she died. Instead, it was her sister Amanda Canales' home, where Amanda lived with her 3 kids. Amanda had a work commitment in New York and asked Alicia to take care of her children during her absence. Alicia, who adored her nephew and nieces, was more than happy to help out. There was a staying nanny in the house with her, and she was one of those who called 911. She woke up to the sound of gunshots, and when she went downstairs, she saw that Alicia was lying at the front door and not moving. The police officers who arrived at the scene took immediate action, beginning with a thorough examination of the house to rule out the possibility that the perpetrator was still inside. They conducted a meticulous search, confirming that only the nanny and Amanda's children were present in the house. Once the frightened children had been safely removed from the house, the police commenced their investigation for evidence. A car parked in front of the house caught their attention, with shell casings discovered nearby, indicating that the shooter had been standing beside the vehicle, just before the front door. Several bullets had hit the door frame, and Alicia's lifeless body was found lying face down, right outside the door. It didn't resemble a robbery. The house was tidy, and it seemed as though the perpetrator hadn't even stepped inside. But who would want Alicia dead, and what could be the motive behind it? When the detectives found out that it was her sister's house, they began to suspect that it was a case of mistaken identity. Perhaps Amanda was the target, but she was in New York when the crime occurred. The nanny, a witness who was present in the house at the time of the crime, provided a calm and coherent account to the investigators. During questioning, she explained that she was upstairs when she heard the sound of gunshots. Upon looking down, she saw Alicia lying face down on the floor, motionless. However, she did not see the perpetrator of the shooting. Startled, the nanny immediately called 911. The nanny gave the police the first crucial lead. She reported that Amanda, Alicia's sister, had problems with her ex-husband, Kevin Lewis. The detectives pored over the reports from the local sheriff's office and discovered that this was not the first time someone had called the police to that address. Every prior incident involved domestic disputes between Amanda and Kevin Lewis, which caught the detectives' attention. They obtained Kevin Lewis's home address, situated in a different part of Everett, and paid him a visit before dawn to conduct an interview. Although his house was shrouded in darkness, Kevin responded to their knock on the door. During the conversation, the officers asked Kevin if he knew where his ex-wife was, and he replied that she should be at home. He looked like he had just woken up. The detectives asked him to tell them where he had spent the night, and he said he had been at home all night, with his sister and mother able to confirm this. He didn't ask what was the reason for the detectives' visit. When the detectives told Kevin about the shooting at his children's residence, he remained impassive, which raised suspicions. A typical parent would have asked about their children's well-being, but Kevin didn't. The detectives then informed Kevin that Amanda was out of town on business, to which he reacted with apparent surprise, saying, "Really?" Next, the detectives investigated neighboring houses and discovered that 2 of them had surveillance cameras that could corroborate or contradict Kevin's alibi. The footage revealed that Kevin's claim of staying home all night was false. A car was seen pulling up to his driveway approximately 40 minutes before the attack on Alicia. The footage showed someone resembling Kevin leaving the house, entering the car, and driving away. Although the recording quality was poor, the police couldn't positively identify the individual. A closer review of footage from another camera provided additional details about the car. While they couldn't identify the vehicle's make, they noticed that the front right rim was a different color from the other 3 light-colored rims. The car returned to Kevin's neighborhood about 20 minutes before the 911 calls reporting the shooting started. The person who had entered the car earlier returned to the house and went back inside. Amanda learned about her sister Alicia's death a few hours later, while she was in New York. When the investigators asked Amanda if she thought her ex-husband Kevin could have been the one who shot Alicia, she replied that she had no doubt it was him. Even though their 8-year marriage had ended, Amanda was still not ready to fully acknowledge how toxic the relationship with her ex-husband had been. Amanda was deeply unhappy throughout their marriage. Even after their divorce in June 2017, Kevin's threats continued to intimidate her. He had physically abused her in the past, and despite their separation, he remained a threat. After the divorce, Amanda was awarded full custody of their 3 children, and Kevin was ordered to pay $800 monthly in child support. However, he repeatedly violated the restraining order, showing up outside her home and terrifying both Amanda and their children. Despite these violations, the police never charged Kevin with any crime. Amanda suffered a severe beating in her driveway just a few weeks before her sister's death. One night, she arrived home late and parked her car next to her house. As she opened the door, someone attacked her. The assault happened so quickly that she didn't get a glimpse of the attacker's face. Nevertheless, she was certain who was responsible: Kevin Lewis, 30, who would later become the prime suspect in the murder of Alicia Canales McGuire, Amanda's sister. The investigators believed that he intended to take the life of his ex-wife. Kevin did not know that she was in New York during that time, and he didn't know that Amanda had asked Alicia to look after her children while she was away. However, there was an inconsistency in this theory. If the man in the footage was really Kevin, it meant he was at his house at the time of the shooting. In addition, his sister and mother provided him with an alibi. The police continued their investigation, exploring various explanations for what had occurred. They revisited Amanda's house to re-examine the scene, including the path the bullets took. According to experts, Alicia was shot when the door was ajar, and the shooter fired at least 7 times, with the shots coming from outside the house and entering it. The evidence gathered at the scene suggested that the shooter stood next to the garage, firing initially, before moving towards the door and firing again from inside it. The medical examiner identified the cause of Alicia's death as multiple gunshot wounds to the head and torso. She got struck by 5 shots, and 2 of the wounds showed gunpowder stippling injury. The medical examiner testified that he could not determine the sequence of the 5 shots, but said that the last 2 gunshot wounds to the head were probably the last 2 wounds inflicted. According to the experts, the 7 shell casings found at the crime scene were fired from the same firearm, and the bullet wounds to Alicia's head were inflicted at close range. The investigators analyzed this theory, but didn't find any evidence confirming this. The shell casings found at the crime scene also attracted the attention of the police because this brand of casings was not very common. They were Russian-made casings manufactured under the Tulamo brand. Since it was not a very common brand, the investigators hoped they would identify the seller of these cartridges and maybe even the buyer. The investigators found that Walmart had sold .40 caliber cartridges of a specific brand, with one of the stores located near the crime scene. Walmart representatives informed the detectives that a man had recently bought 9mm Tulamo cartridges, and they had CCTV footage of the transaction. The detectives promptly visited Walmart to review the footage, which was recorded on September 18th, 2 days prior to Alicia's death. They initially suspected that Kevin Lewis might be the buyer, but they were mistaken. The man in the footage was not Kevin, and he had paid using a credit card. The investigators looked into this individual and discovered no connection to Kevin Lewis, Amanda, or the nanny, forcing them to search for new evidence. After thoroughly examining all the existing theories, the investigators approached Amanda to gather new information about Kevin. Initially, Amanda stated that their relationship was okay during the honeymoon phase, but Kevin's behavior gradually became more aggressive, culminating in physical abuse. Their tumultuous relationship ultimately ended in divorce, with a restraining order issued against Kevin and Amanda gaining full custody of their children. Despite her emotional distress, Amanda firmly believed that Alicia's death was a case of mistaken identity, convinced that the intended target was actually herself. She suspected that Lewis had orchestrated the attack, but the police found that Kevin had a solid alibi, as he was at home during the time of the shooting. The investigators have again reviewed the footage taken on the night of Alicia's death. Now they noticed something they hadn't noticed before. This low-quality recording shows Kevin, or the man who left his house, walking up to the car and getting into the back seat behind the driver. But why didn't he get into the front passenger seat? In search of an answer, the investigators concluded that someone else was already sitting in the front passenger seat. Therefore, by the time the car pulled up to Kevin Lewis's house, there were probably already 2 people in it, and perhaps that's why he had to sit in the back seat. The police had no evidence to link Kevin to Alicia's death. However, they gathered evidence of Kevin's attacks on his ex-wife Amanda and arrested him in November 2018. The court sentenced him to 3 years in prison. More than a year had passed since Alicia's death, but the case remained unsolved. Then, in 2019, a breakthrough finally occurred when a woman contacted the police station with crucial information. She provided a tip that a girl who lived in nearby Spokane had been overheard bragging at a party about being hired to kill someone on York Road, the same road where Alicia was fatally shot. Although the police were initially skeptical, given that Spokane is about 5 hours away from Everett, they decided to investigate further. The woman who called said she was at a party where she met a young woman who introduced herself as Angelica. The latter bragged about how she and her boyfriend participated in the crime. According to this woman, Angelica said someone died because of a shot in the head, and they were shooting from around the corner and were hired by the children's father. Moreover, Angelica said they took the wrong person's life. It was a case of mistaken identity. The police never publicly disclosed the details of this case, but investigators and family members were aware that Alicia had been fatally shot in the head. Since Angelica possessed knowledge of the crime specifics, the police became intrigued by her information. During their search for Angelica, investigators discovered that her real name was Alexis Hale. On her social media, they found photos of her posing with a 9mm pistol, which may have been the murder weapon. Additionally, there were several videos showing a man in the background, later identified as Alexis's boyfriend, Jadon Phelps. On the night of Alicia's death, Alexis Hale posted a video filmed through the windshield of a car, analyzing the road signs. The investigators determined the exact location of this car at that moment. It was about a 10-minute drive from Kevin Lewis's house. In the following video taken a few hours after Alicia's death, Jadon Phelps bragged about a wad of money. The investigators saw 5 comments under Phelps's photo on social media, and one of the comments was from his aunt, whom they recognized as Kevin Lewis's mother. It turned out that Jadon Phelps was Kevin's cousin. The police had sufficient evidence to make arrests. The first person they detained was Alexis Hale, who was 17 years old. As the officers handcuffed her, she protested, claiming they had no right to arrest her due to her age, yet she seemed aware of the reasons behind her arrest. She promptly requested a lawyer. Meanwhile, in a different part of the city, the police took Jadon Phelps into custody. The investigators used Phelps and Hale's phone records to show that they had driven from Spokane to Everett to carry out the shooting. Security footage from Lewis's neighbors showed someone getting into a car in the early hours of September 20th. The man in a white top left at 11:13 a.m. and returned at 1:37 a.m. When the police went to see Lewis after Alicia's death, he was wearing a white top. Alexis remained silent with the investigators. At the time, Kevin Lewis, now known as Kevin, was serving a 3-year prison sentence for assaulting Amanda. The investigators turned to Phelps, the one who had arranged the crime, hoping to gather information. As they suspected, Phelps confessed and revealed the name of the man who had hired him, Kevin Lewis. The police took Phelps to the crime scene where he provided further details of the crime. Phelps initially just showed them where the house was, and they were taking him back to his home. Later, when they went back, Phelps showed them the area where he was standing, and he described how Alicia opened the door slightly, and as Lexi was walking towards them, Phelps started shooting at the door. Alicia closed the door, and Phelps opened it and fired a few more shots. Kevin Lewis, who was already in jail on an unrelated charge, was arrested on charges of aggravated murder with a firearm, conspiracy to commit murder, and solicitation to commit murder for the September 2017 death of Alicia Canales McGuire. In July 2020, Phelps, who was then 20, pleaded guilty to premeditated first-degree murder, and the court sentenced him to 31 years in prison. Hale, who was then 18, pleaded guilty to the same charge and got 15 years. Phelps testified at the trial that he had committed the crime for money and the street cred. He claimed he had spent the money Lewis paid him to get some tattoos, a pair of Timberland boots, and a Ferragamo belt buckle. He also claimed his former girlfriend had got the pistol from a family member. Lewis pleaded not guilty and faced a trial later that year. The prosecution said that he had paid $2,400 to his cousin and his girlfriend to get his ex-wife out of the way, turning them into teenage assassins. But in a tragic case of mistaken identity, it had been Alicia who had opened the door. Phelps said Lewis had directed them to the home, but claimed he didn't know who the target was, just the address. On the way back, Lewis handed Phelps an envelope of money, after dropping Lewis back at his residence. Phelps and Hale returned to the location Lewis had pointed out, and Phelps fired the gun until it was empty, starting from his position near the garage, and fired the last couple after walking up to the front porch. The muzzle of the gun crossed the threshold. The last couple of shots were around the neck and head area. Phelps and Hale left in their car, but then returned because they believed they might have left a glove at the scene. When they returned, they saw police cars, so they turned around and left. They accessed GPS directions and drove back to Spokane. The defense argued that Lewis had never actually used the word kill when talking to his cousin and had simply said to get the target out of the way. But the prosecution reminded the court of Kevin's history of violence and the threats he'd made against Amanda. In November 2021, Lewis was found guilty of first-degree murder by a jury following a 6-week trial that lasted less than 3.5 hours. In January 2022, at the age of 34, Kevin was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. As part of the sentence, Judge Thompson prohibited Lewis from having any contact with his ex-wife, children, Phelps, and Hale for the remainder of his life. According to records, Lewis is currently serving his sentence at the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla County. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today, we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Celeste Mano. Celeste Mano's story began quite harmlessly. She was receiving attention from a work colleague which she consistently ignored. She sincerely hoped that her admirer would soon understand and just leave her alone. However, one careless action by Celeste drastically changed everything, turning her suitor into an obsessed pursuer. Another thoughtless act led to irreversible consequences. Celeste Cristano was born on November 30th, 1997, in the northeastern part of Melbourne in Victoria State, Australia. She was the youngest of 2 children to parents Eggy Diero and Tony Mano. She grew up alongside her older brother named Alessandro. According to some accounts, their father left his wife when the children were still small and soon remarried. However, he always maintained contact with his older offspring, supported them financially, and tried to be actively involved in their lives. During her school years, Celeste was quite sociable, active, and friendly. She engaged in sports and dance, served as the captain of the cheerleading team, and had big plans for her future. Initially, she dreamed of becoming a lawyer and enrolled in the prestigious University of Melbourne, studying criminal and civil law. However, towards the end of her studies, she found law dull and began studying advertising and marketing. In 2018, she was hired by a large and rapidly growing company that sold various goods on e-commerce platforms. Smart and talented, Celeste quickly grasped everything on the fly. She successfully fulfilled her duties and rapidly ascended the career ladder. From a simple call center worker, she became the head of an entire department in less than 2 years. Considered one of the most promising employees, everyone admired her intelligence, initiative, and ability to organize work competently. Moreover, Celeste possessed outstanding external attributes and a flawless figure. During her university years, she even participated in the university beauty contest and was among the top 3 leaders. She always had many admirers from a young age, but was meticulous in choosing partners. Among her colleagues was Louis Sacco. He worked at the company nearly 16 years older than her and showed a lively interest in Celeste from her first days at the office. Worth noting is that Louis Sacco was quite reserved and unsociable, evidently lacking career ambitions, as he long occupied the same minor position without desire for development. Kind, smiling, and open, Celeste did not want to hurt Louis Sacco's feelings, so she always politely declined whenever he tried asking her out. Despite this, Lou repeatedly attempted to draw her attention in various ways. Sometimes Celeste would make jokes to lighten the mood, but firmly desired nothing to do with him. His attentions were persistent and awkwardly annoying, but keeping composure, Celeste hoped he would soon give up or shift his focus elsewhere as time passed. Louis Sacco remained relentless, becoming almost obsessed with the young beauty, Celeste Mano. Everyone around him noticed it. One day, Celeste confided in a close colleague that she wouldn't ever consider a relationship with Louis. First, he was odd and unpredictable. Second, she never felt any attraction towards men who lacked ambition and life goals. Third, the significant age gap also played a role. Nonetheless, she did pity him because despite all his efforts, he stood no chance. Unfortunately, Louis Sacco lost focus on his work in his fruitless attempts to win Celeste's attention and affection. Historically, he was a very hard-working employee, but now he completely ignored his job duties and his productivity suffered greatly. Senior management was unhappy with this drop in performance. Louis was given 3 reprimands and warnings. In early autumn of 2019, the company ultimately fired him for his negligence. Louis Sacco was very upset by this turn of events. As he packed up his things at the office, it seemed he was about to cry. Celeste experienced mixed feelings. On one hand, she felt relieved that he would disappear from her life and stop bothering her with persistent overtures. But on the other hand, she felt some guilt believing his dismissal partly happened because of her. As a department manager, Celeste thanked Louis for his years of service and escorted him to the building exit. She tried to encourage him with a pat on the shoulder and sincerely wished him luck as they parted ways. However, it turned out this harmless act was a mistake, a catalyst that fueled Louis' belief they could make their relationship work. Instantly, Louis decided that Celeste was simply afraid to start an office romance since she was his boss and feared general disapproval or damage to her career. Now convinced nothing stood in the way of their potential happiness together, Louis, overwhelmed by his emotions, unexpectedly kissed Celeste on the cheek. An awkward pause ensued. Stunned by his audacity, Celeste didn't know how to react, so she just turned around and hurried back into the office building without saying anything. This reaction further convinced Louis that Celeste harbored feelings for him and believed he should not give up pursuing her. Just days after, Louis created a social media account, found Celeste's profile, and sent her a friend request. At first, she accepted it, thinking no harm would come of it. But when he started bombarding her with requests to meet up and go out together, she tried to decline politely. Eventually, she just blocked him. The following day, the former colleague sent another friend request from a newly created profile. Celeste tried to ignore it. However, he began commenting on her photos, praising her looks, and mentioning how great they would be as a couple. She then adjusted her profile settings so only friends could send her messages or comment on her photos or posts. A week later, during a family gathering, she mentioned the persistent pursuer to her relatives. She also recounted the strange incident from the day he was fired. Her family listened but assumed it wasn't serious, and that the unwanted admirer would lose interest and disappear from her life soon. Louis didn't have Celeste's personal phone number while they worked together. They only communicated through work channels. But now Celeste began receiving peculiar romantic messages from an unknown number. She quickly guessed who they were from. The admirer sent romantic poems he had written, praised her beauty again, and tried to convince her to meet up. Celeste answered his call only once in an attempt to have a serious conversation with him. She explained that nothing could happen between them and tried to persuade him to stop pursuing her. Nevertheless, he didn't listen. Instead, he just complimented how pleasant her voice was and expressed how glad he was that she had finally picked up. After this conversation, she tried blocking him again, but each time he'd call from a new number. Eventually, she decided to change her own number. Still within a week or so later, Louis managed to find it out and continued his telephone harassment. Seeking some form of protection for about half a year, Celeste kept unsuccessful attempts at ignoring the crazed admirer. She blocked his numbers and fake social media pages, but he persisted with messages and continually disrupted her usual life. The stream of messages continued, and over time, their nature shifted from romantic to bold and threatening. The man stopped asking politely. He began demanding meetings and detailing his delusional, intimate fantasies about what he intended to do with her immediately. However, that wasn't the worst of it. It became evident that the stalker began following her from work to home, where she lived. Celeste didn't initially realize that Louis was now present in her life beyond just the messages. He was literally tracking her every move. She occasionally glimpsed him near her home, but convinced herself each time that it was merely a product of nerves or imagination. When she finally understood that she was not mistaken and that Louis, with his obsessive behavior, was indeed following her, she decided to seek police protection. Celeste wanted law enforcement to issue a special order prohibiting the stalker from approaching her and her home. However, the officers were indifferent, even mocking at times. According to them, writing poems or expressing explicit fantasies in text messages is neither illegal nor punishable. Since Celeste couldn't provide evidence of Louis following her and lurking near her home, they simply asked her to leave the precinct and not hinder them from catching real criminals. For another 6 months, Celeste continued to endure relentless harassment from her former colleague. During workdays, she frequently noticed his car parked across the street from her office. In the evenings, he would drive past her house several times. She constantly felt his gaze on her, increasing her anxiety and making daily life tense. In August 2020, Celeste approached the police again. This time she provided photo and video evidence on her phone, showing that Louis was indeed following her. A different officer took her statement this time, an officer who took the situation more seriously and expressed surprise at his colleague's previous indifference. He advised her to immediately go to court, where a restraining order was issued against Louis. He was notified that he could no longer call, approach her, or try to contact her in any other way. Clearly, the man did not expect this turn of events and indeed disappeared from Celeste's sight for a few weeks. She was happy for the first time in a while. She felt free and believed that the harasser would no longer bother her. However, her relief was premature. Less than a month later, she began receiving messages from unknown numbers. Initially, Louis pleaded and then demanded she retract her statement and remove the restraining order, as he believed it interfered with their romantic relationship. After receiving several messages, Celeste immediately went to the police, since her pursuer had violated the restraining order. Now, he had to face the consequences. The man was fined and warned that further violations could lead to much more severe measures. If he didn't leave the young woman alone, he could end up in jail. After this incident, Louis did not make his presence known for almost 2 months. The young woman believed he had finally left her alone. In September 2020, Celeste met a young man named Chris Reedsdale. He was just a year older than her, and they quickly found they had many common interests, views on life, and goals. Consequently, a romantic relationship soon developed between them. She told her new boyfriend about the harassment from her former admirer and confessed that although Louis had not appeared, she still felt anxious. Chris endeavored to surround his girlfriend with care and attention, doing everything to make her feel safe and worry-free. In early November, Celeste invited Chris to a family dinner to introduce him to her parents and brother. Celeste's choice was well received by her family. They quickly hit it off, and her mother even jested that her daughter was now in safe hands. The following weeks passed peacefully, with no sign of the former admirer, who did not attempt to contact Celeste. The young woman found joy in spending all her free time with Chris. It appeared she no longer worried about Louis possibly barging back into her life or causing her any harm. On November 15, 2020, the love-struck couple decided to go out on a date. They sat in a cafe, enjoying each other's company. During this pleasant moment, the young woman suggested they capture it by taking a selfie. The photo turned out very romantic. They were sitting at the same table, embracing, smiling, and looking genuinely happy. Celeste was so fond of this picture that she decided to use it as her profile picture on social media. In doing so, she aimed to share the news of her new relationship and indicate how serious things were between them. Chris also posted the photo on his page with a touching caption about how much he loved Celeste, and how he would do everything to keep her eyes sparkling with happiness, as depicted in the picture. Unfortunately, this outing would be their last as a couple. On the evening of their final date, Chris dropped Celeste off at her home, and they said goodbye with plans to meet again the next day. Celeste spent about an hour in the kitchen talking with her mother about her boyfriend before heading to bed, since she had to get up early for work the next morning. On Monday, November 16, 2020, around 4 a.m., Eggy was awakened by the sound of breaking glass, but didn't immediately grasp what was happening. Then there were suspicious noises. Banging, screams, and commotion followed. At first, it seemed like these noises were coming from outside on the street. However, she soon realized they were emanating from within the house. Eggy leapt out of bed, threw on a robe, and rushed to her daughter's room. She flung open the door and in the dim light saw someone literally jumping away from Celeste's bed before escaping through a broken window. When Eggy turned on the light, she was confronted with a horrifying scene. Her daughter lay in a pool of her own blood, covered in cuts and small shards of broken glass. Celeste was struggling to breathe, gasping for air. Her eyes were wide open, staring upward. Immediately, her mother called emergency services and tried to stem the deep bleeding wounds on her daughter's body until the paramedics arrived. Unfortunately, it was too late. By the time police doctors got there, she had already passed away. The medical examiners later found over 20 penetrating stab wounds on her body, with the fatal blow aimed at her heart. During the investigation, the prime suspect was scrutinized. Analyzing the situation and comparing it with Eggy's testimony, police concluded that the assailant took less than 3 minutes to break into the victim's room through the window and carry out the attack before her mother entered. The suspect used a large butcher's knife, striking randomly, while Celeste tried to defend herself as indicated by numerous cuts on her arms. When asked if her daughter had any enemies, Eggy could only recall one name: Louis Sacco. He had obsessively pursued the young woman for over a year, harassing her with calls and threatening messages. This information was corroborated by other family members as well as friends and colleagues. At the scene, the suspect left many bloody fingerprints, and DNA was found on a fence he jumped over while fleeing since he had injured his hand. It became imperative to detain and interrogate Louis immediately as the prime suspect to verify and compare all evidence and witness statements. Louis was arrested that same day, but initially vehemently denied his involvement in the incident. He insisted that he loved Celeste and would never harm her. Forensic results later confirmed the bloody fingerprints found in the victim's room and on the fence to him. Law enforcement also highlighted the restraining order against approaching the young woman, which he had violated. Additionally, on the evening before the tragedy, it was discovered that Louis had purchased a hammer and a large knife at a local hardware store. This transaction was captured on surveillance cameras at the checkout. Louis used the hammer to break into the house through a window and then used the knife in his fatal attack on the unfortunate woman. A calculated criminal or a man in need of treatment. The evidence against Sacco was undeniable, further underscored by his long-term surveillance of the victim, knowing practically everything about her. The final trigger for him appeared to be a photo posted by the young woman on social media with her new boyfriend. After seeing this, he went to a store, bought a knife and hammer, and under cover of night, went to Celeste's home to end her life. His actions were seen as calculated and premeditated criminal activity. Yet Louis's behavior was quite erratic, raising questions about his mental stability. Notably, at nearly 39 years old, he had never married, continued living with his parents, had almost no friends, and never held a job for long periods. People described him as nervous and introverted with severe socialization issues. Additionally, Louis had a biological brother serving a lengthy sentence for another criminal act at that time. Following these events, a forensic psychiatric evaluation was ordered for Louis, with his attorney insisting that his client required specialized treatment instead of imprisonment. This argument angered and upset the victim's family, who feared that this cruel individual might evade punishment. After interviewing Lue and analyzing his behavior, psychiatric experts concluded he did indeed suffer from some mental disorders. However, and it's important, they determined that at the time of the crime he was fully aware of his actions. Furthermore, he had meticulously planned the crime in advance, carefully considering the details. As a result, despite his efforts to feign insanity, Sacco would inevitably face a trial. The trial and subsequent sentencing did not occur until the autumn of 2023, 3 years after the tragic death of the young woman. During this period, the criminal made several attempts to demonstrate his mental illness, hoping to avoid conviction for deliberate criminal acts. He spent most of this time in a psychiatric facility. In the courtroom, Lue appeared calm and detached, showing little interest in the proceedings. Although he admitted his guilt, he maintained that his intention was not to take the girl's life, but to win her affection. However, the jury unanimously found Lue guilty on all charges. He was then sentenced to 36 years in prison, with the possibility of parole no earlier than 30 years. Celeste's law, which ultimately was not passed, aimed to address the fact that existing laws did not consider online stalking and phone harassment as criminal offenses. The parents of Celeste highlighted that their daughter had sought police protection as early as 2020, but her complaint was not taken seriously due to the limitations of the current legislation. Over the 3-year period leading up to the trial, the mother of the deceased young woman, along with legal experts and activists, collaborated to develop Celeste's law. This law sought to establish criminal accountability for online stalking through social media platforms, text messages, and emails. The hope was that such a law would provide protection for countless women and girls, preventing similar tragedies from occurring. Despite these efforts, the investigations revealed that most online stalkers remained covert and did not attempt any direct contact with their victims. The amendments made to the legislation primarily focused on restricting access to personal information on social media platforms. In cases involving severe stalking with threats, a restraining order could be issued, similar to real-life scenarios. Nevertheless, there remained a lack of criminal accountability for such crimes. Currently, a stalker might only receive a verbal warning for their actions, and in cases of repeated violations, they could face fines, but not always. The enactment of Celeste's law, with its proposed changes, remains pending. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Carol Carroll. Carol Carroll, a young mother and actress in the adult film industry, is a stark example of the perils that pursuing fame and money in this field can bring. She did not consider her work immoral. Her goal was to achieve financial independence and eventually retire once she had saved enough to support herself and her young son. Tragically, however, she was never able to leave the industry, and who once admired by thousands of fans, was eventually discovered dismembered on a rocky cliff beside a road. Carol Nicole Carroll was born on September 19, 1995, in a small Italian province. She was the only child of her parents, Fabio and Josephine, who had Italian maternal roots and Dutch paternal heritage. When she was just 4 years old, her parents decided to divorce, and she stayed with her mother. Subsequently, her father moved back to his homeland, the Netherlands, remarried, and had more children. Josephine chose to remain in Italy, raising her daughter alone, as her former husband offered little support. They lived in a small community called Cesto Kenda. Carol's mother worked multiple jobs simultaneously to provide her daughter with everything necessary: a good education and the opportunity for a better life. Carol grew up to be a beautiful, kind, and sociable girl with many friends and an easy rapport with others. As a schoolgirl, she actively participated in sports, particularly horseback riding, and regularly attended a dance studio. Carol was fluent in 3 languages, loved traveling across Europe, read extensively, and could engage in conversation on almost any subject. As a teenager, she blossomed into a true beauty with a slim, feminine figure, already attracting many admirers and suitors. She reveled in being the center of attention. After finishing school, she enrolled in a technical university to study industrial design, arts, and fashion, where she soon became one of the top students in her class. An unexpected pregnancy during her freshman year led Carol to develop a romantic relationship with a young man a year her senior, who was studying at the Faculty of Architecture and Design. In the fall of 2020, when Carol was 20 years old, she discovered she was pregnant. This news came as a complete surprise to both her and the child's father, as they were both students and utterly unprepared for such a development. Nevertheless, Carol firmly decided to keep the baby. In 2016, the young couple had a son together, and their lives changed drastically. Both had to leave school because they lacked the funds to support themselves and their newborn. The new parents decided to move to Verona, where there were more opportunities to earn a living and provide for their family. Carol got a job as a sales consultant in a large cosmetics and perfume retail chain shortly after her son turned 1, while her boyfriend worked on various projects from home, also taking care of their son. In the middle of 2019, Carol unexpectedly fell for another man named Angelo, with whom she began a passionate affair. The couple secretly met for about 6 months, renting hotel rooms, messaging each other at night, and striving to spend every free moment together. However, just before the new year, the father of Carol's child found out about her relationship and decided to part ways with his unfaithful partner. Carol felt this was for the best since she was planning to leave for her new boyfriend anyway. But then a problem arose. Angelo lived in his parents' house, and Carol couldn't move there with her child from a previous relationship. Therefore, they decided to rent a place together. But at that time, the coronavirus pandemic swept the world, leaving the young couple jobless and unable to afford their own apartment. Carol eventually moved into the home of her new boyfriend's parents and decided to temporarily leave her 4-year-old son with his biological father until the situation stabilized and she could bring him to live with her. Meanwhile, the situation worsened. A widespread self-isolation regime was declared, everyone was confined to their homes, and Carol faced significant financial difficulties. During this challenging period, Angelo and his parents supported Carol as best they could. She effectively lived at their expense in their home, unable to contribute financially to her young son. Moreover, Carol's mother was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, which was progressing, and the woman needed costly therapy. Unexpectedly during the lockdown, Carol frantically considered ways to earn money from home to support her son and ill mother. She decided to try earning through social networks and her own YouTube channel, sharing about life in isolation and the challenges she faced. However, this content did not attract much interest, but her attractive appearance as a novice blogger drew attention, earning her compliments and even some inappropriate proposals in the comments. A subscriber suggested she create an account on the platform OnlyFans, noting that her attractive looks would be highly appreciated there, and she could become a star and earn quickly. Carol took this advice and registered on the service under the pseudonym Charlotte Angel. She began creating revealing content, posting her intimate photos and short videos. Quickly, she amassed a significant following willing to pay for such content. Carol soon began earning well, but kept from her boyfriend and close relatives how she was making money and what she was being paid for. Over time, her content became more explicit and sophisticated as she strove to please her fans, and she herself enjoyed this line of work. Carol hid the details of her job as long as she could. But about 6 months later, someone she knew stumbled upon her account. Rumors spread, and soon everyone knew how she was making a living. She wasn't too upset and even tried to justify it by claiming that her work was also a form of art that brought in a decent income and fully satisfied her. However, the conservative Italians were not ready to accept this, so friends and close ones gradually turned away from Carol, believing she was engaged in something immoral and associating with her might tarnish their reputations. Carol herself regarded this attitude towards her work as prejudice and was confident that she would achieve success, becoming a wealthy and famous adult film star. Soon, the beauty became so popular that adult film studios took serious interest. Several directors approached the sultry Italian with offers to star in their films, and she readily agreed. She participated in group shoots and public performances. Word of her activities quickly reached Angelo, who naively thought his girlfriend was working remotely as a designer, but sometimes went to the office. He was shocked and at a loss for what to do next, as he hadn't planned on breaking up with her. However, when his parents learned about the situation, they insisted he break up with this fallen woman immediately, lest she disgrace their entire family. By then, Carol had enough money to rent her own place. Her OnlyFans account was extremely popular. She regularly received offers from directors, and her fees kept increasing. In interviews, she claimed she didn't plan to do this all her life and intended to eventually finish her education and try her hand as a designer or modeler. But for now, she truly enjoyed what she was doing and was well compensated for it. Nonetheless, Carol often spoke about the constant moral pressure from those around her, their judgments, and attempts to shame her, causing certain psychological traumas. She called her work art and advocated for every woman's right to choose her profession without fear of judgment. Attempting to move on, and with a new dominant lover at 25, Carol moved to a small town called Rescaldina in the Milan province, deciding to start over. She planned to leave her career in the adult industry behind and got a job as a sales consultant at a perfume boutique. It seemed she had completely changed her life, but this was only temporary. A few months later, she met a 42-year-old local banker named David Fontana, who was passionate about photography, specializing in nude photography. They met online where he was seeking a model for his explicit projects. Carol responded to his offer, and during their first meeting, the pair felt an immediate mutual attraction. Fontana had been married for many years, but this did not stop him from starting a relationship with the young woman. They began dating, organizing explicit photographic sessions that regularly led to intimacy. Soon, he learned about Carol's past activities and persuaded her to return to filmmaking, recognizing her true talent. David had mixed feelings for her. He loved her, wanted to possess her, but also liked seeing his young lover in adult films. In March 2021, the banker divorced his wife and started living with Carol, realizing their most explicit and sinful fantasies. He helped her create content that was incredibly popular on OnlyFans, but he took a cut of the profits from their joint work. Carol soon became so successful and popular that foreign directors and studios began offering her lucrative contracts for shoots. Fontana was quite jealous in life, reacting sharply when others paid attention to his girlfriend on the street or tried flirting with her. But there were no restrictions or limits when it came to filming. He treated it as a regular job, which the actress was completely comfortable with. A few months later, Angelo called her, confessing he missed her greatly. He proposed they get back together, noting he was ready to accept her line of work and wouldn't interfere or restrict her. Carol was touched, but admitted she already had another man. Nevertheless, they continued to communicate, but when David learned about this, he became enraged, threatened Angelo, and even set his car on fire. Angelo immediately reported to the police about the threats to his life and property damage. The authorities issued a restraining order preventing Fontana from approaching Angelo, but no evidence of the banker's involvement in the arson was found, so he did not compensate for the damage. The in-demand actress often flew overseas for shoots, and her subscribers numbered over 30,000. Carol was saving up to buy her own home, take her son with her, and planned to leave the adult film industry, find another job, and focus on raising her son. Meanwhile, she began making custom videos, which proved to be a lucrative business. Fans sent her their own scripts of what they wanted to see, and she brought their fantasies to life for a handsome fee. Fontana continued to help her with filming and editing. They still lived together and shared the profits. In September 2021, Carol met an actor named Salvatore Galdo on a film set, who was her partner in several explicit films. However, real feelings ignited between them, and they started a romantic relationship. They dated secretly, fearing what David might do to her new lover. She waited for the right moment to tell the banker everything and break up with him for good. A few months later, Galdo gave her an engagement ring, asking her to become his lawful wife, and she joyfully accepted. By the end of the year, Carol had saved enough money to buy her own home. She planned to take her son, marry Salvatore, and finally decided to talk to Fontana. The man took the news surprisingly calmly. It seemed he understood everything and was ready to let her go to her new lover, but they still had several unfinished projects for which they had already been paid. They agreed to complete the work and then peacefully part ways forever. The mysterious disappearance of Carol. At the beginning of 2022, Carol unexpectedly vanished. She stopped appearing in films, ceased online streams, didn't communicate with colleagues, and accepted no new offers from directors. Many knew she had planned to leave the industry, so they assumed she had done just that. However, even her friends and fiancé, who were very concerned, couldn't reach her. Carol didn't answer calls but responded to messages in messengers, claiming she was fine, had decided to radically change her life, and needed time for herself. To her fiancé, Salvatore, she wrote that she had contracted COVID-19, was self-isolating, and they couldn't see each other for a while. Apparently, this explanation satisfied him, as he did not raise the alarm either. A month or 3 months later, on social media, new posts occasionally appeared on her account, but she hardly interacted with anyone, limiting herself to terse and brief responses, according to the latest photos on Carol's page. She had gone on a seaside vacation without telling anyone. Parts of an unidentified body in bags were discovered on March 20th, 2022. A passerby was walking along the outskirts of the Italian community of Borno on a road along a rocky cliff. He was suddenly drawn to large black trash bags lying on the slope near a body of water. The area was scenic and deserted, so the man was annoyed that someone had decided to dump trash there. He went down to the nearest bag and tried to lift it, but it was quite heavy. The real horror struck him when he saw human fingers poking through the torn polyethylene. The man immediately reported his gruesome discovery to the police, and the responding officers found 4 bags containing a human body divided into 18 parts. The remains were so disfigured that identification seemed impossible. Forensic experts determined it was a young woman who had died at least 2 months earlier, but they could not establish the cause of death. The body had been in a freezer before someone dumped it off the cliff. Presumably, the criminal drove here, simply throwing the bags down, hoping that in such a secluded place, they would remain undiscovered for a long time. The bags tore on impact, causing some of the contents to spill out. Clearly, the criminal had done everything possible to keep the remains unidentified for as long as possible by removing all distinctive features. Pieces of skin were cut off in areas likely covered by tattoos. However, parts of these tattoos remained but were severely damaged. The skin in those areas had been burned with hot objects, cut and doused with acid. Nevertheless, by piecing together bits of the tattoos and comparing them with a database of missing persons, the police concluded that no one was looking for a woman with such features. This was odd, leading to the speculation that the deceased was not local. This remained the belief until a news report about the body was broadcasted, asking anyone who might recognize the described features to come forward. Soon after, a woman who appeared in adult films came to the station and said that based on the description of the tattoos, she recognized her colleague who had disappeared in early January. The actress mentioned that the deceased worked under the pseudonym Charlotte, but she did not know her real name. This information proved crucial, as law enforcement now knew what the girl looked like in life, and they quickly established her identity and real name. The peculiar fiancé. As soon as the deceased's name became known, it was revealed that she had gotten engaged to her colleague, Salvatore Galdo, shortly before her disappearance. Curiously, he had not reported his fiancée missing. This led to the first suspect being found and detained. However, the man was clearly upset by the news of his beloved's demise and puzzled as to why he himself was under suspicion. According to Salvatore, He had kept in touch with the woman through messengers and social media, providing their correspondence as proof. Thus, he had no idea that Carol had long been deceased. He claimed that his beloved had contracted COVID-19 earlier in the year and was self-isolating, which is why he hadn't visited her. When police asked why he hadn't called her to check if she needed help, he said he had spoken by phone with Fontana, who was nearby and had promised to look after the woman. The fiancé's story was disjointed and unconvincing, but his testimony brought a second suspect into the case who needed to be detained and interrogated. However, there was no need to search for David, as he himself turned up at the station the next day to report a person missing. The horrifying truth: Fontana obviously did not expect the body to be found so quickly, so he hadn't been following the news. When he learned that Carol had been found and identified, he became alarmed but still believed the detectives would not track him down. However, when the police arrested Salvatore, the man realized this person would lead law enforcement right to him, as they had communicated by phone, and he had concocted a story about COVID-19, promising to take care of his fiancée. David was visibly nervous, consistently contradicting his own statements, and the story he told was highly implausible. According to him, he and Carol had been very close, but they hadn't seen each other for several months, and she had stopped making contact. He couldn't explain why he had only contacted the police now, under pressure. Fontana eventually began to testify, confessing that he had accidentally ended Carol's life. He claimed that in early January, they were filming extreme content for a client who had paid a large sum. The script required David to bind the woman, tape her mouth shut, put a bag over her head, and then brutally beat, torture, and torment her using various tools, including a hammer. They had agreed that he would not hit her with full force, but she would act as if she were in severe pain. However, during the process, he supposedly went too far, misjudged a hammer blow, and fractured her skull. When he removed the bag from her head, he saw she was in death throes, but instead of calling for medical help or trying to assist her, he, out of mercy, decided to end her suffering with a final hammer blow. Then, the criminal, allegedly in a panic, dismembered the body, but unsure what to do next, simply stored the remains in his freezer for over 2 months, before deciding to dispose of them. Reconstructing the actual events, the investigation revealed that the mysterious, perverse client was David himself, who had contacted the woman using a fake account. Evidently, he didn't want to let her go and devised a sophisticated plan of revenge because she had decided to leave him. Additionally, during the torture session, the man extracted the password to her phone, which supposedly was also part of the script and a client's whim. On January 11th, around 9 in the evening, Fontana ended the woman's life by fatally striking her with a hammer. The next day, he purchased a large freezer using the deceased's credit card, as well as a saw and an axe from a hardware store, which he used to dismember the body. He made every effort to disfigure the body to prevent identification. He removed the tattoos along with the skin, and what remained of them he tried to burn, shred, and literally erase. After that, David placed the body parts in bags and stored them in the freezer, where they remained for over 2 months. During this time, the criminal communicated with the victim's relatives and friends on her behalf, and also managed her social media, creating the illusion that Carol was alive. By the end of March, the criminal apparently thought the danger had passed and decided to dispose of the body by dumping it off a cliff in a deserted area. He hoped that the remains would either never be found or, by the time they would have decomposed to the point of being unidentifiable. However, David was mistaken, and the body was discovered just 2 days later, with authorities tracking him down within a week. Trial and verdict. The most bewildering and incomprehensible aspect of this case was that nearly 3 months after the girl's disappearance, none of her relatives or friends had reported her missing. They were all satisfied with the responses in messengers and posts on social media. Even the fiancé, who thought Carol was ill, was not alarmed by the fact that she didn't answer calls and never tried to visit her. If someone had raised the alarm, the murderer would have been tracked immediately via the signal from the victim's phone, which had been on and in David's possession all this time. At the trial, Fontana expressed remorse and swore that he loved Molly and had taken her life unintentionally. He also claimed that he had planned to end his own life after her death, unable to cope with the grief. Naturally, such a statement sounded foolish, and nobody believed him. But the defense insisted that the incident was indeed an unintentional act of violence, despite the fact that the defendant himself had commissioned the recording of the brutal video. On June 12, 2023, the court found Fontana guilty of manslaughter and sentenced him to 30 years in prison. He was also ordered to pay compensation to the deceased's son in the amount of €200,000, as well as €100,000 to Carol's mother and €50,000 to the father of her child. Surprisingly, the manner of assassinating was not deemed cruel, and the dismemberment of the body was not considered an aggravating factor, so the criminal could potentially be eligible for parole. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Catherine Wells Burr. On the morning of September 12, 2012, a local resident named Orlando was hurrying home after a lengthy night shift at a gas station. He had promised his wife that he would take their young daughter Maria to daycare. Loud music played in the car to keep him awake as the trees along the road swiftly passed by one after another. As he emerged from a sharp turn, he saw black smoke. Orlando slowed down. Smoke was billowing from a nearby parking lot where a car was engulfed in flames. Orlando stopped, ran to take a closer look, but couldn't get close because of the fire. 4 minutes later, when the firefighters arrived at the scene, the car was completely burnt out. The arriving police cordoned off the area with safety tape to keep the gathering onlookers at a distance. The place was quite deserted so early in the morning, and there were no witnesses nearby who could describe the incident's exact moment. Upon examining the scene, a charred body was discovered. The police had to identify the victim and determine the causes of this tragic death. There were no signs of a car accident or skid marks found nearby. Similarly, no tire tread marks from another vehicle were found. The police's initial theory was that the death was caused by a car self-ignition or spontaneous combustion due to malfunctions. A lengthy investigation and multiple expert analyses were ahead. The remains were transported to the forensic laboratory to determine the identity and cause of death of the deceased. Fragments of the burned vehicle were also delivered to the forensic laboratory to identify any malfunctions and establish the cause of the fire. The police began their investigation by checking the missing persons database and recent reports of disappearances. Forensic experts quickly identified the deceased. She was a 23-year-old local resident, Catherine Wells Burr. On the same day, a report of a missing person was filed by Rafal Novak concerning the disappearance of her. According to Rafal Novak's report, he left for work at 5:30 a.m., while his girlfriend Catherine was still sleeping soundly at home. Although they worked for the same company, his shift started 2 hours earlier. When Catherine did not show up for work after this time and Rafal could not find her at any of places, he contacted the police. The investigation began. The police interviewed the victim's parents and sister, as well as Rafal Novak, who reported her missing, and all her colleagues and friends. Gradually, by piecing together information about the last days and subsequently the years of the young woman's life, they managed to reconstruct a sequence of events that led to her tragic demise. Catherine Wells Burr was born in 1989. Her father and mom, Phil and Jane Wells Burr, in the United Kingdom. She was the second child in her family, with an older sister named Lynn. During the summer of 2010, while on a university break, Catherine met one of the employees, 31-year-old Rafal Novak, on a new vacuum cleaner production line. The tall, ruggedly handsome blonde quickly caught Catherine's eye. He was an immigrant from Poland with a former wife and son back home. About 4 years prior, he had moved to England in search of a better life. Catherine and Rafal soon started dating. Initially, they met for lunch at the cafe on the production site, but these lunches quickly turned into romantic dinners. Rafal courted Catherine beautifully, gifting her lovely bouquets, taking her to movies, and going for walks. Rafal opened up to Catherine, sharing his past life and reasons for moving to the UK. Catherine's trusting heart let the blonde man in completely. Their relationship progressed so swiftly that within a few months, Catherine introduced Rafal to her parents. They joyfully welcomed their daughter's choice into the family, hopeful for the couple's future happiness. Soon, the lovers were planning their wedding. In 2011, Catherine graduated with honors from Bath Spa University and landed a promising job as a business analyst at Pneumatic International, the company that manufactures Henry vacuum cleaners. She quickly advanced in her career, providing good job opportunities for her parents and sister. Catherine was intelligent and well-educated. She always knew how to approach people, was concerned with her colleagues' problems, and was very attentive to those around her. Her kind gaze and radiant smile endeared her to people who held the young leader in high regard. Catherine Wells Burr's career was on a fast track to success. Her substantial earnings, combined with those of her partner Rafal Novak, allowed them to purchase a spacious home with a terrace in Willow Way. Despite their financial well-being, the house was bought on a mortgage, for which the young couple secured insurance coverage as per their agreement with the bank. Youth, successful careers, and love. It seemed they had everything needed for happiness. Yet, the fateful day of September 12, 2012, marked a dividing line in their lives, changing everything from before to after. The investigation pressed on, uncovering new and unfamiliar facts about the lives of Catherine and Rafal. Over time, the veil of deceit that had enveloped their relationship from the start began to lift. 29-year-old Rafal Novak left behind a wife and child in Poland, fleeing to escape significant debts. He relocated to the UK, where he met Anna Lagwinowicz. Since 2008, they maintained a close relationship, then Catherine came into the picture for a while. Rafal saw both women, but ultimately he chose Catherine Wells Burr, seeing her as a more viable option for a family and financial stability. While Catherine genuinely dreamed of a happy marriage with the man she loved and starting a family, Novak was plotting a scheme to end her life, intending to leave himself and his mistress, Anna Lagwinowicz, with the life insurance payout and the large house, a significant portion of the funds for which had been contributed by Catherine. The plot of this crime was meticulously planned and executed with even greater cruelty and cold-bloodedness. On the day of her disappearance, after waiting a few hours, Rafal approached Catherine's boss to inquire about her whereabouts, feigning sincere panic and despair in front of Catherine's colleagues and relatives. Catherine was not found at her parents' home, nor at her own, and her car was missing as well. Rafal recalled that she had been receiving threatening letters from a certain mentally unstable admirer for some time. Following this, her family contacted the police. The family was in the living room of the young couple's house, awaiting her return, when they were informed that a burning car with a body inside had been found. Rafal mentioned that the evening before her disappearance was entirely normal. The couple had gone for a walk after work, stopped by a store for groceries, had dinner, and then went to bed together after watching some television. Catherine did not appear scared or disturbed. However, a more detailed investigation proved that her death occurred earlier. Catherine was strangled around 2 a.m., likely in her own bed while she was sleeping. Her lifeless body was then placed in the car, taken a short distance from the house, and callously set on fire in an attempt to destroy evidence. Yet Rafal Novak had a solid alibi. He was at work from 5:30 a.m., and according to him, Catherine was asleep in bed when he left. The burning car was discovered between 6 and 7 a.m. However, Rafal was still at home at 1:30 a.m., significantly altering the case's direction. Thus, Rafal Novak became the prime suspect in the murder of Catherine Wells Burr. Evidence allowed for Novak to be detained pending further investigation. Rafal claimed that Catherine was being pursued by a stalker who had repeatedly written to her and driven her to hysteria. During the investigation, it was revealed that Catherine indeed had accounts on several adult websites, indicating a hidden side of her life unknown to her close ones. Intimate photos and flirtatious exchanges with men were found, along with a letter from a secret admirer. However, no matter how long you try to twist the truth, it always comes to light. In an attempt to mislead the investigation and direct it towards a false trail, Rafal forgot to destroy the evidence proving his direct involvement in Catherine's demise. Importantly, this provided the prosecution with a motive. Upon examining Novak's phone, investigators discovered that he never ceased communication and meetings with Anna Logvinovich. They actively met over the last few months, and it was also found that the man had a financial interest. Shortly before Catherine's demise, they both insured their lives for a sum of £123,000, with Catherine and Rafal being the sole beneficiaries of the insurance contracts and recipients of the payouts. The receipt of a substantial life insurance sum emerged as the primary motive in the case regarding Catherine's demise and the arson of her car to confuse the investigation. Police discovered that on the day of Catherine's disappearance, she sent a message to Anna Logwinowicz's phone. Surveillance cameras also revealed that a few days before the crime, Anna and her uncle filled a full canister of gasoline at a gas station, suggesting their potential involvement in the case. 32-year-old Anna Lagwinowicz and her 38-year-old uncle, Tadeusz Dmitryshin, became suspects in the complicity of intentional crime and arson to conceal evidence. The crime was meticulously planned over several months by the trio. They prepared thoroughly for the act, creating accounts on pornographic websites, uploading photoshopped images of Catherine, and fabricating and saving exchanges with various men to lead the investigation astray with a false trail. When Rafal and Anna realized it was futile to deny the irrefutable evidence, they started blaming each other. The conspirators wove a web of deceitful lies around an honest and cheerful young woman. They created fake online profiles for her on websites used by people seeking casual sexual encounters, and went to great lengths to conceal their crime, not only setting her body on fire, but also fabricating a completely fictitious backstory for her. They intended to depict Catherine as a promiscuous woman with many secrets and desires. One of the conspirators sent a text message from Catherine's phone at 5:17 a.m. on the day of her death to a fictional person, suggesting she was headed to meet him. However, forensic experts determined that when the fire started in the car, Catherine was wearing only her favorite nightgown, not the outfit she would have chosen for a meeting with a man. The police also discovered that a pillow was missing from her bed, and the only pillowcase had been washed and was hanging on a clothesline, leading them to believe she was suffocated in Anna Logwinowicz's car. Detectives found a SIM card linked to the number Catherine was supposed to have texted that morning in Anna's apartment trash bin, and they also found notes she had written seeking inspiration for messages supposedly sent by the mysterious person. As soon as Novak and Lainovich realized the game was up, they both claimed that Catherine's demise was the act of a hired criminal. A week before the trial began, Anna asked a fellow inmate to secretly pass on a fake confession from an imaginary hitman who claimed Novak paid him £20,000 sterling to end Catherine's life. The story penned by Lainovich might have offered a chilling insight into what happened to their victim, according to this fictional hitman. Rafal Novak played the role of a loving boyfriend perfectly in the days leading up to Catherine's demise, holding hands and kissing her in front of family members. He even told her mother, Jane, that he had lost his world and his future. Rafal Novak refused to acknowledge his involvement in the young woman's death and went further, telling her mother, Jane Wells Burr, that her daughter was receiving emails and text messages from an ex-boyfriend who said if he couldn't have her, no one could, to complete the narrative. He even claimed she spoke of taking her own life. Worse still, Novak let the distraught Wells family parents comfort him, who believed he was also mourning the young woman he loved. Rafal's acting was so convincing that Catherine's mother, Jane, hugged him after her death and allowed him to call her Mom. She said that after the police told her in the early days of the investigation that he was seen more as a witness than a suspect, she decided to offer him all the support possible. I thought if Catherine loved him that much and he was part of our family, then he deserved to come back. The lengthy trial commenced under the chairmanship of Justice Sharp. The jury heard during the trial that the three defendants hoped to receive a life insurance payout of £123,000 sterling and half ownership of a two-bedroom home in Mangold, Somerset, valued at £137,000 sterling, following Catherine Wells Burr's death. The court was told that Rafal Novak showed no emotion when police discovered the woman's body in her burned car on the morning of September 12th. Anna Lagwinovich, who often shook her head and laughed on the defendant's bench when Novak suggested she was responsible for the crime, refused to take the witness stand. Dmitry Sheen also did not testify in his defense during the trial. Judge told the defendants that the murder was a terrible, merciless crime, cold-bloodedly committed with a gross breach of trust. None of the three showed any emotion during the sentencing. Judge Justice Sharp sentenced the three Polish nationals to mandatory life sentences with a minimum of 32 years in prison without the possibility of early release. The judge expressed heartfelt sympathy for Catherine's parents. They could never have known that behind the facade presented to them by Rafal Novak was a person devoid of remorse and decency. It was all about the money. Novak and Catherine had no ties binding them. They were not married, nor did they have children. The crime against Catherine was motivated by money, selfishness, and greed. While in the case of Anna Lagwinovich, it stemmed from jealousy and a desire for revenge. At the request of the parents, Judge Justice Sharp read statements from Catherine's mother and sister. Her mother wept in the courtroom as her statement was read, which said Catherine was a caring, loving, sincere, generous, loyal, thoughtful, exceptional, and amazing. She had a bright and promising future with so much potential. Her parents, Phil and I, were immensely proud of the young woman she had become. The manner of Catherine's passing, a cruel and calculated act of villainy, and the hatred shown to her, will haunt us for the rest of our lives. Now, she considers Rafal Novak an evil person who should spend the rest of his life behind bars. Catherine's father, Philip, added that they took him into their home, and he became like a son, but he betrayed them all during the trial. Rafal Novak, covered in tattoos, wept in the witness box, insisting he had no part in the demise of his true love. A father of one, who has a wife and a teenage son back in Poland, told the jurors that everyone is blaming him for something he never did. The court heard that Novak showed no emotion when the police discovered Catherine Wells Burr's body in her burned car. Her mother, Jane Wells Burr, told the jurors that he didn't even mention Catherine, instead asking for a steak dinner after his initial release from police custody. Mrs. Wells Burr said that as soon as they bought a house together and took out a life insurance policy, her daughter's fate was sealed. She told the police that her life had a bounty on it, and indeed, she had signed her own death warrant the moment she signed the mortgage. Thus, 31-year-old Rafal Novak, a factory worker, was found guilty of the crime against his girlfriend, having suffocated her with a pillow while she slept. Afterward, he orchestrated a conspiracy with his secret lover, 32-year-old Anna Lagwinovich, and her uncle, 38-year-old Tadeusz Dmytryshin, to claim a life insurance payout of £123,000 and a share in the house. It is believed that they also lived in Taunton, took Wells Burr's body in her Ford Focus to a remote location 7 miles from the city, and set the car on fire at 6 a.m., by which time Novak was already at work, providing him with a solid alibi. The jurors of the Royal Court of Bristol found Rafal Novak, Anna Lagwinovich, and Tadeusz Dmytryshin Shine, all originally from Poland, guilty of the crime. The crime was the culmination of months of secret meetings and phone calls between Rafal Novak and his Polish lover, Anna Lagwinovich, with Catherine completely unaware of her role in what turned out to be a love triangle. The accused spent months leading detectives on a false trail, creating fake profiles for the girl on adult websites, and sending her messages from a supposed mysterious lover. Following the verdict, the parents of the young woman who lost her life, Catherine Wells Burr, called for stricter immigration controls. Philip and Jane Wells Burr, who have separated after the tragic loss of their daughter, stated that Rafał Nowak, convicted of assaulting his wife in Poland, would not have been allowed entry into the UK if the immigration rules were as stringent as those in the United States of America. They blamed the European Union and stated that the UK needs to tighten its entry measures for foreign nationals. Family members of Catherine Wells Burr wept in court as the sentence was announced. The three perpetrators showed no emotion. The criminal trio received life sentences without the possibility of parole. Now, they have their whole lives ahead to ponder over criminal schemes, but without any chance to put them into practice. Thus, through their own efforts, the Polish immigrants traded their dreams of a successful and wealthy life for free prison cells. After the verdict was announced, the victim's mother spoke her final words, describing her daughter as a beautiful young woman. She expressed pride in her daughter's academic accomplishments, having earned a first-class degree from the University of Bath Spa. The mother described her daughter as determined, hardworking, and beautiful, and expressed the difficulty of continuing on without her. She lamented the loss of her daughter's great potential and the happiness she could have experienced, stating that her life was taken away and the family was robbed of her presence. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Jake Wagner. The case involving the crime against 8 members of the Roden family became one of the most notorious and complex in Ohio overnight. The motto "all for one and one for all" became fatal for each family member. Only the minor children were spared from the mass violence. The investigation spanned over 10 states in the USA. Detectives conducted more than 600 interviews, gathering around 700 witness statements. Various theories were considered, including self-harm, retaliation by illegal substance dealers, and cult sacrifices. Attorney General Mike DeWine even suspected local residents of withholding crucial information. It seemed the investigation had hit a dead end until a moment came when a solution lying on the surface became apparent. As it turns out, the most complex situations are often rooted in simplicity. This story illustrates how familial bonds turned into a bloodbath in Pike County, Ohio, USA. It all began with a simple crush. Hannah Mae Roden was 13 years old when she met 18-year-old Edward Jake Wagner. The young man invited her to the prom, and from that evening on, they were inseparable. Their relationship elicited mixed feelings. Undoubtedly, the love that blossomed between them was evident. However, the age difference raised concerns and doubts. Nevertheless, the young couple's parents did not obstruct their relationship, for they had all been young once. Over time, the Rodens and Wagners started spending weekends and parties together. Their love was passionate and carefree. When Hannah turned 15, she announced her pregnancy. Upon hearing the news, Jake was overjoyed. He anticipated how delighted his family would be with the new addition. The Wagners highly valued traditions and lineage, hence they adored children, as they saw the continuation of their lineage in them. Even ancestral names were passed down from generation to generation. Jake's father was named George Wagner III, and his brother George Wagner IV. The Rodens, on the other hand, had a simpler, less ostentatious approach to children, but this did not diminish their family values. Christopher and Dana Roden, Hannah's parents, remained very close and united even after their divorce. They loved their 3 children and dedicated their lives to their well-being. Unlike the Wagners, the Roden family had a modest income. 40-year-old Christopher worked as a handyman at the Big Bear Lake family complex, while 37-year-old Dana was a nurse's aide at a youth rehabilitation center. Nevertheless, they managed to instill humanity and diligence in Christopher Jr., Hannah, and Clarence Frankie. Everyone was thrilled about the arrival of little Sophie. To celebrate her birthday, a grand party was organized. Soon after, Jake suggested that Hannah move in with him and his family, arguing that it would make life more comfortable for both of them. His logic seemed sound, given that they were living in a house. However, Hannah declined the invitation. By that time, she had come to understand her partner better and saw the invitation as an attempt to limit her independence. Moreover, the once caring and attentive young man had become suspicious and aggressive. Jake had resorted to physical aggression on several occasions, and his rough behavior had cooled Hannah's feelings for him. Hannah's refusal became a point of contention for the Wagners. Both of Sophie's parents were determined to gain full custody of the girl, and the families began to advocate for their own interests. Driven by his desire, Jake went as far as to threaten Hannah, telling her that if necessary, he would take Sophie by force, claiming that if she truly loved her, she would have handed the girl over to be raised in a healthy environment. Jake believed that the Rodens posed a danger to Sophie, and these discussions continued for 2 years, during which he became more tyrannical. Hannah grew weary of the excessive control, and in March 2015, she completely terminated the relationship. Additionally, she had come to learn something disturbing. It transpired that Jake's brother, George IV, had obtained custody of a son by threatening the boy's mother with a weapon. This confirmed that the Wagners viewed moral and physical coercion as acceptable methods to safeguard their interests. Roden decided to distance herself from the situation. She wanted to raise her daughter alone while working as a nurse's assistant and finishing school. The situation worsened when everyone learned about Hannah's second pregnancy, although she claimed the child was from another man. Jake had his doubts and attempted to find out if she was seeing someone else. So in December 2015, he accessed her social media accounts, but found no evidence of infidelity. At the end of his investigation, he discovered that the woman was communicating with George IV's former mother-in-law, which piqued his genuine interest. A court case soon followed, during which the Wagner family repeatedly interacted with the woman. "They'll have to get rid of me before they can take custody of my daughter," Hannah wrote in her message. Jake shared the details of the correspondence with his family, which enraged them. Then your maternal grandmother, Rita Newcomb, aged 65, forged an important document about custody. Furthermore, during a court session to determine the granddaughter's residence, Christopher Roden and George Wagner III had a serious disagreement. Ultimately, the relationship between the families completely deteriorated. Soon, a terrible idea occurred to the Wagner family. Hannah was so uncooperative that they felt the need to eliminate her, as well as the entire Roden family who could claim custody of Sophie. This insane thought turned into a monstrous plan that solidified by Christmas 2016. People's thoughts during the festive season are usually focused on love and creation, which cannot be said for the Wagner couple who organized a vote. It was decided whether they would implement their plan. All family members agreed, and the only thing left was to assign roles and prepare. 5 months were spent studying the Roden family's homes and surveillance cameras, with a particular focus on their daily routines and work schedules. Each person involved in the criminal plot had a specific role. For instance, Angela Wagner purchased sneakers for all family members to wear at a predetermined time, preventing the victims from seeking help. She also obtained a device to block communication, planning to secretly install it on the Roden family's phones to minimize noise. George III suggested making homemade silencers. He also arranged the transportation on the night of the crime, aiming to secure a van that would not draw attention. Sophie was to remain safe at home with Angela, as the court had granted Hannah and Jake joint custody of the child. The Wagners chose a time when it was their turn to look after the girl, meticulously planning every detail for a flawless execution. On the night of April 21, 2016, George Wagner III decided to visit Christopher Roden, allegedly to offer him a job opportunity that could improve his financial situation. The job offer was just a pretext to gain access to the house. Unsuspectingly, Roden Sr. opened the door on the morning of April 22, 2016. At about 8 p.m., Bobby Jo Manley, Dana Roden's sister, entered Christopher's house. She did this daily since the day he had offered her a job. Bobby took care of the animals belonging to the Roden family. She noticed someone was inside, which was unusual for that time when everyone typically went about their business. Inside the house, in a pool of blood, lay Christopher and 38-year-old Gary, his cousin. The men lived together. Horrified, she grabbed the phone and dialed emergency services. reporting what she had seen and requesting assistance at 477 Union Hill Road. Shocked, Bobby proceeded to the homes of other relatives. She knocked loudly on one of their doors, and soon, a 3-year-old boy, Clarence Roden's son, appeared. She asked him where his parents were, but the boy did not respond, only pointing towards the bed. Entering the house, she screamed at the sight of 20-year-olds Clarence and Hannah Hazel, his wife. The couple was deceased, with their 6-month-old baby stirring between them, alive but splattered with the blood of his parents. After Bobby's emergency call, the police immediately rushed to the specified address. As they approached the Roden family's property, they were stopped by a concerned neighbor, who urged them to check 2 more addresses where other family members resided. The neighbor's suspicion was correct, and in the 3rd house, the police discovered the bloodied bodies of the victims, 19-year-old Hannah, 16-year-old Christopher, and their relative Dana. Remarkably, the attackers had spared the life of Hannah's youngest child, a baby girl. Only a few days later, another victim was discovered, 44-year-old Kenneth, the elder Roden's brother, who lived a 15-minute walk from the others. By 2 p.m., 8 victims had been identified: Christopher, Dana, Clarence, Hannah, Hazel, Christopher Jr., Hannah Mae, Kenneth, and Gary. The only survivors were small children, a 3-year-old, a 6-month-old baby, and a newborn just 4 days old, along with 2-year-old Sophie, who was at the Wagner home at the time of the incident. After examining the bodies, the police concluded that all the victims had been killed in their sleep by gunshot wounds. Detectives later pieced together the events of that night. The patriarch of the family was awake when the attackers burst into the house, as evidenced by a wound on his right arm. Christopher attempted to defend himself, but was hit with 9 shots to the head, torso, and limbs. 5 bullets were removed from Dana Roden's neck and head, and the rest of the family was killed by gunshots to the head. Gary was shot 5 times, Christopher Jr. was shot 4 times, Clarence and his wife Hannah were shot 3 times each, and Hannah Mae was shot twice. Kenneth was the only one to be shot once. In total, the assailant fired 32 shots, some even after the victims had died. In addition, bruises were found on some of the bodies, indicating physical abuse. Since no one in the vicinity heard anything, investigators concluded that the perpetrators used silencers, suggesting a carefully planned and executed act. It was clear that the victims were not randomly selected. Someone wanted to take revenge on the entire family. During the search, the police found 5 Remington shell casings of different types and an unused bullet from a different model of gun. Leonard Manley, Dana's father, claimed that the criminals were familiar with the Rodens, or else the dogs would have been barking all over the place. The question of who committed such an act kept the police officers busy. The Attorney General's office provided more than $20,000 for the funeral of the Roden family. The deceased were interred in several stages on April 28, 2016. Gary was the first of the victims to be buried in South Shore, Kentucky, followed by Hannah Hazel, whose funeral was held on May 1st in the village of Atway, Coteau County, Ohio. The other victims were buried on May 3rd in West Portsmouth, in the same county. As for the fate of the surviving children, they were placed in the care of relatives. A wave of panic swept through the neighborhood, and the police urged the relatives of the Rodens to take necessary precautions and advised all residents of Pike to stay away from their homes at night. The cold-blooded mass murder outraged residents across the state, who demanded that the results of the investigation be made public and that the perpetrators be apprehended as soon as possible. Cincinnati businessman Jeff Ruby offered $25,000 for information that would help arrest and convict those involved in the murder, but he later declined the reward offer. No less than 100 individuals were part of the investigative task force working on the Roden case. Following the funerals, as part of the investigation, 3 houses belonging to the slain family were towed away the following day, and several more vehicles met the same fate, all transported to a secure facility. This was done to preserve evidence and protect the personal belongings of the deceased. After the investigation, The family's cars and farming equipment were planned to be returned to the victims' relatives. Forensic specialists joined the investigation, and the house were meticulously examined. However, no DNA of the suspects was found in any of them. Cameras had been installed in the mobile homes, but they too provided no information, as they had been disabled. Those who planned the crime had thought through every detail meticulously. It seemed there were no significant leads until detectives discovered something. Cannabis crops were found at 3 crime scenes in one location. There were about 200 plants. Officers believed the cannabis was grown for sale, not personal use, leading to speculation about the involvement of Mexican drug traffickers. However, the amount of cannabis found was too small to suggest an attack by an entire cartel. In January 2017, a close relative of the Roden family was arrested for drug trafficking, which was considered an unexpected circumstance. Leonard Manley stated that his daughter, Dana, had no involvement with the cannabis operations. "They're trying to tarnish Dana's reputation, and I don't like it," he asserted. Some family members confirmed that Christopher and Kenneth Roden, the older brothers, grew marijuana, but were unaware of any large-scale cultivation. The theory of a family feud over criminally obtained money was also debunked. Alongside the discovery of prohibited substances, specialized equipment for breeding chickens for fighting, and cages with fighting equipment found at the Rodens' residence. It soon became clear that illegal fights were not the cause of the homicide. Months went by without uncovering the true motive behind the crime. On April 13, 2017, local authorities announced they lacked sufficient evidence to make any arrests. Nevertheless, prosecutor Rob Young stated the investigation was ongoing, suggesting they had some leads they were not yet ready to disclose. Another year passed, and the second anniversary of the mass crime received little attention, with no coverage in the local press, and neither the sheriff nor the prosecutor attending the memorial service. This led the community to believe the investigation had stalled. Unexpectedly, on May 12, 2017, a SWAT team raided a home in Pike County, located 10 miles from the crime scene. Their initial search was for suspects, but they later revealed that they were gathering evidence. Detectives also searched a house in Adams County that had previously been owned by Jake Wagner, though he had sold it by that time. On June 20th, 2017, the investigation publicly shifted focus to the Wagner family. 26-year-old Jake, 27-year-old George III, 47-year-old George IV, and 48-year-old Angela, who lived 15 miles from the victims. The Wagners had moved to Kali, Alaska, citing difficulties staying in the area. They claimed to have loved the Roden family, stating their deaths caused them immense suffering. Rob Young's words from a year earlier proved true, as the investigation had made a breakthrough and was now seeking information from the public on the Wagners' discussions about firearms, ammunition, vehicles, etc. 2 years prior. It wasn't long before the suspects, running low on funds, returned to Ohio, where detectives had gathered enough evidence for arrests, including proving that Jake had hacked into Hannah's account. During the examination of the Wagner family's devices, research related to guardianship was discovered. It was also found that Angela had purchased athletic shoes for the entire family just a few weeks before the crime, and the sole pattern of one of these matched the one found at one of the crime scenes. The officers believed that Angela was the mastermind behind the horrific scheme, with Jake as the primary executor. According to the investigation, each family member was involved in the criminal act. On November 13, 2018, the Attorney General announced the arrest of the Wagner couple, as well as their sons. They were charged with planning and carrying out the termination of life. Rita Newcomb, Angela's 65-year-old mother, and Frida Wagner, George III's mother, were also arrested. They faced charges of perjury and obstructing justice in 2019. Rita Newcomb underwent handwriting analysis, which proved her involvement in forging a guardianship document for Sophie. Later, to avoid imprisonment, she struck a plea deal. The charges against Frederica Vonner were dropped in June 2019, but the other Vonner remained incarcerated, having refused to cooperate with the investigation. They denied any involvement in the deaths of the rodents and expressed sorrow over their passing, wishing for the real perpetrators to be caught. On April 22, 2021, 5 years after the tragic incident, Jake decided to make a deal with the prosecution. The agreement was that he would disclose details of the crime in exchange for all family members receiving life sentences instead of the death penalty. Vonner Jr. admitted to taking the lives of 5 out of 8 individuals, thus pleading guilty to 23 criminal charges, including 8 counts of aggravated crime. The remaining charges included burglary, conspiracy, illegal possession of dangerous ammunition, forgery of evidence and documents, interception of telegrams and oral messages, unauthorized use of property, obstruction of justice, involvement in corrupt activities, and unlawful intimate conduct with a young woman. He indicated that eliminating the mother was seen as the only way to secure custody of his daughter, and he felt compelled to do the same to the other family members, fearing they would seek vengeance and refuse to relinquish the girl. The next to stand trial was Angela on September 10th. She pled guilty to conspiracy to commit aggravated crime, robbery, and evidence tampering. She also agreed to testify against the other defendants. In exchange, the charge of ending a life was dropped, and she was sentenced to 30 years in prison. The trial of George Wagner's fourth began on August 28, 2022. The man denied any involvement in the crimes, insisting he was completely unaware. In contrast, the prosecution argued that he participated in planning, executing, and concealing the crimes. Ultimately, George IV was found guilty on 22 counts and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The trial for George III is scheduled for February 2024. Despite his entire family being convicted, he continues to claim innocence, likely facing the same fate as his older son. This once harmonious relationship ended in tragedy. The collective madness of the Wagner is beyond understanding and forgiveness. Their actions left 3 children orphaned. What will become of Sophie when she grows up and realizes what happened in their fight for custody and a facade of well-being? The Wagner deprived the young girl of loving parents, relatives, and a peaceful life. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Diana Quer. On the morning of August 22, 2016, residents of the small Spanish town of Pobo do Caramal, hurrying to work, discovered flyers posted throughout the town. Dedicated volunteers had tirelessly pasted them on every building. The flyers featured a photograph of a young 18-year-old woman named Diana Quer. The young woman had a very slender build, standing about 6 feet tall. Her black hair, brown eyes, and delicate features made her appearance quite captivating. The evening before her disappearance, she was wearing pink shorts, a t-shirt, a white sweatshirt, and black sneakers. The description said her left home the night before and suddenly disappeared. Since last night, her family, along with volunteers and special services, have been desperately and tirelessly searching for the missing girl in every possible way. They have thoroughly searched every street and explored every corner, hoping to find some trace and bring Diana home. Juan Carlos, Diana's father, was in Madrid but wasted no time in contacting the police to trace the calls from his daughter's phone and find out the last location of her phone. He also contacted the local newspaper and urged residents to help with the search. If you have any information, even the smallest, contact the police. The police need your help, Diana's father reported. Diana's mother, deeply distressed, pleaded with the public, "We are doing everything we can to find Diana, but we still haven't gotten any answers. If you have any information, please help us. We are in a situation where even the slightest rumor can become important and help us find our daughter." Diana Quer was born on August 12, 1998, in Madrid. She was the daughter of Diana Cristina Lopez Pinel Pinjo and Juan Carlo Quer, and had a sister named Valeria. The family was quite wealthy and closely related. However, in 2013, Diana's parents divorced, which greatly affected the sisters. They faced depression and often conflicted over the attention of their mother, who took most of the care of them. Despite this, the father saw his daughters regularly during vacations. Diana, her mother, and sister often visited the small coastal town of Pobo do Caramal, which had a population of around 10,000. In the summer of 2016, Diana's family spent their vacation as usual in the cozy town of Pobo do Caramal. Every summer, they returned here to enjoy the tranquility and beauty of the place. Sunday, August 21st, was expected to be just like any other day. In the evening, around 10, Diana approached her mother and informed her that she was going to Val Inclán Park to meet her friends and have fun in celebration of the Feast of the Virgin Carmen. Val Inclán Park was not far from the cottage where the family was staying, and it was a place where Diana often walked. Her mother, seeing nothing unusual about this, allowed her to go there again. She spent that evening joyfully with her friends. 4 hours later, Diana said goodbye to her friends and was about to return home, unaware that this would be their final farewell. On her way, she encountered her acquaintance, Pazo de Ariel, not far from the pizzeria where Diana frequently spent time. It was around 2:30 in the morning when they parted ways. Pazo de Ariel was the last person to see Diana on that fateful night. The morning of August 22, 2016, turned into a nightmare for Diana's mother, Maria Care Lopez Pinel. At 8:30 in the morning, she realized that something was wrong with her daughter. She had not returned home from a party. Her cell phone was either turned off or out of range, which caused alarm. The mother decided not to wait and immediately called the police, reporting her daughter as missing. Based on the information provided by the mother, it could be concluded that Diana did not have any serious emotional or mental health issues, despite a troubled childhood due to her parents' divorce. Her prolonged absence was very unusual and raised serious concerns. Police began to investigate the complex and confusing events surrounding the disappearance of Diana Maria Care Lopez Pinel. Investigators had to determine what happened when Diana disappeared without leaving any trace. It turned out that Diana's last messages were sent to a friend of hers from Madrid via WhatsApp. In these messages, she wrote about a certain stranger who was stalking her and shouting strange phrases, scaring her. These messages were Diana's last contact with the outside world. She no longer responded to the messages, although they had been read. The next day, the police began to retrace the route Diana had to take to get home. It was along the road that they found a black hairband that looked very similar to the one Diana had been wearing that night. This was the only item recovered from the scene of her disappearance, but investigators had no other evidence. Diana's friends were unable to provide any helpful information, and there were no CCTV cameras on the final part of her journey. The street was dimly lit and sparsely populated, with just a few garages and a rundown Boomerang nightclub lining the road. Some witnesses reported seeing Diana get out of a car with 3 other people and then move to a different car that drove her away from the port. However, these accounts were not confirmed. Investigators considered 2 main hypotheses. The first suggested that Diana was kidnapped by someone she might have known, while the second linked her disappearance to a potential attack by a mentally unstable individual. Diana's mother even proposed a third scenario in which her daughter could have been taken away on a boat. Diana's friend and ex-boyfriend reported that she met a man from Morocco, and together they purchased hashish. However, this information only complicated the picture of her disappearance. An important point was the media reports about the discovery of the clothes Diana wore that evening. But her mother denied this information, claiming that no clothes were found. Additionally, her credit card and identification were left in the house, so Diana could not have simply run away, leaving all her belongings and documents behind. This fact and other circumstances confirmed that her disappearance was not voluntary. Nevertheless, the case remained mysterious and could not be solved. Shortly after Diana's disappearance, the press reported on the quarrel that had occurred between Diana and her mother just a few days before the tragic event. The media claimed that Diana had suffered a nervous breakdown that required medical attention, and that her younger sister Valeria had also been hospitalized with similar symptoms. To prevent further litigation and conflict, the custody rights to the younger sister were transferred to the father on Thursday, September 5th. This was a preventive measure to avoid further strife in the local community, which was already gripped by an unsettling atmosphere over Diana's disappearance. The father and his daughter left town, and rumors began to spread that the family was hiding something significant. According to Diana's friends, running away from home was a common occurrence for the sisters, especially for her younger sister Valeria, who was only 16 years old. The family dynamics were complicated, and arguments between the mother and the daughters were not uncommon. This information became public, and the immediate question that arose was, why was the mother so anxious when Diana didn't return home if her had frequently left home before? On Wednesday, August 31st, Diana's parents did not show up for a scheduled press interview where they were scheduled to provide details about the investigation. The family lawyer explained that the parents were emotionally devastated at the thought that they might never see their daughter again. The newspaper El Mundo published an article on September 11th that shed light on other aspects of the family's life. It said the mother's statement that Diana did not have mental problems was contradicted by information about her disappearance in April, during which time Diane left home for 3 days and her mother did not contact the police. She would turn off her phone to anger her mother and said she no longer wanted to live with her. Letters written by Diana and Valeria to each other also appeared in the press, from which it became clear that both sisters were going through serious emotional problems. Valeria has even been hospitalized several times over the past year, once having to have her stomach pumped due to an overdose of prescription drugs. In the absence of progress in the investigation into Diana's disappearance, prosecutors have launched an investigation into the abuse of the Lopez family's youngest daughter, Valeria. The investigation into Diana's disappearance continues to be intense and is moving at full speed. Forensic experts seized several items belonging to her, including a toothbrush, a comb, a personal computer, her diary, and some prescription medications. These items were subjected to a thorough analysis. Investigators then began questioning Diana's acquaintances, including a young Moroccan man with whom Diana had a brief affair. All of these measures failed to yield the desired results, and further police searches remained unsuccessful. The police conducted extensive searches in the mountains, forests, rivers, and lakes near the site of the disappearance. However, it appears that Diana disappeared around 3 a.m., and the last signal from her phone was found in the Tarragon area, 13 miles from where the family was staying. 72 days after her disappearance, Diana K's case remained a mystery, as none of the investigators' leads have yet been confirmed. In addition to a hairband, police found a cell phone that matched the description of Diana's phone, and her father confirmed that it was his daughter's cell phone 2 months after her disappearance. Diana's Facebook profile was suddenly active, and friends and relatives immediately notified the police and provided screenshots. It turned out that the Remember Password function had been used to avoid entering profile login details, leaving two theories. Either Diana had forgotten her password, or the attacker was trying to gain access to her profile. Diana's phone was a crucial piece of evidence in the case, but it failed to provide any insight into the mysterious disappearance. On November 10, 2016, the driver of the very car in which Diana was last seen was finally identified. The man had previously been detained on charges of human trafficking, and information about his potential involvement in Diana's disappearance was kept secret for a long time, so as not to disrupt the ongoing investigation. His wife claimed that he was with her that night, which initially excluded him from the list of suspects. However, on December 25, 2017, an incident occurred that became a pivotal point in the investigation. One of hers was attacked by a man demanding her phone and threatening her with a weapon. The terrified victim screamed, and a couple passing by came to her aid, rescuing her from the thug who tried to pull her into a car. The shaken victim immediately contacted the police, providing a description of the perpetrator and his license plate number. The next morning, police arrested 41-year-old Jose Enrique Abinay, who was also known as Elo. The man already had a criminal past. The police immediately discovered that Jose Enrique was the same driver who had been detained in 2016 on suspicion of kidnapping Diana. However, he was released at the time because the police believed the alibi provided by his wife. The police questioned the suspect and his wife again, and as a result of the interrogation, the wife admitted that she had previously lied, and that in fact, on the night of Diana's disappearance, her husband had been out of the house and did not return until 4 a.m. Jose Enrique was eventually forced to admit that he accidentally hit Diana on the road and then was afraid to go to the police, which is why he decided to dispose of the body. However, he later changed his version of events, confessing to kidnapping and killing Diana. According to him, he came to the seashore to pick up gasoline from abandoned cars, and it was there that he saw Diana. Jose kidnapped her, tried to force her to have sexual intercourse, and then strangled her. This shocking truth revealed new details about the case and confirmed that Diana K. Lopez's disappearance was the result of a horrific crime. The disappearance of Diana K. Lopez was a long and traumatic experience for her family and everyone following the case. Nearly 500 days of investigation and continuous media speculation only added to the anguish of her loved ones. The accusations directed at Diana's parents only served to confuse and impede the investigation. Despite this, through persistent investigation and the testimony of a second victim, investigators were able to gather the necessary evidence and find the perpetrator. Diana will be remembered by her loved ones as a bright and vivacious young woman who was unlucky enough to find herself in the path of a violent criminal. Her story serves as a reminder of how important it is to unite in the difficult moments of fighting crime, to end impunity, and ensure the safety of all citizens. Unfortunately, the perpetrator did not admit for a long time where he hid Diana's body, but later, family and friends managed to say goodbye to Diana and give her a proper burial. The body was found in the well of an abandoned warehouse in January 2018. Jose was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 35 years. El Chicle was initially held at the A Lama and Teixeiro prisons in Galicia, but was later transferred to the Vilo prison near Leon to avoid potential retaliation from former associates and rivals in the cocaine trade. His prison correspondence showed no signs of remorse, and he even tried to implicate his ex-wife in the murder. At Villa Hierro, he became a dominant figure, and his fellow inmates included David Ubel, another Galician from Morania, who was the first person to be sentenced to life imprisonment since the reintroduction of this sentence in 2015. The missing person case and the subsequent murder trial received extensive media coverage. Some news outlets were criticized for relying on morbid fascination or sensationalism in their reporting. In October 2019, the same program was condemned by Quer's family for broadcasting an alleged last photograph of the murder victim, as the relatives believed it was implying that her clothing was responsible for her death. Some authors believe that Quer's case received disproportionate media coverage because she was young, wealthy, and female. In contrast, the case of Ivan Duran, a 30-year-old man from nearby Bayona who went missing 3 days later, did not receive as much attention. Duran's father said that the police resources were disproportionately focused on the search for Quer. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Smith family. On July 5, 2005, around 8 a.m. on Deck 7, in one of the cabins of the Royal Caribbean cruise ship, 16-year-old Emily Rausch of Chicago was preparing for a new sunny day. Outside her cabin window, Emily noticed something strange that caused her alarm. She saw what appeared to be blood smeared across the canopy that served as a cover for the nearby lifeboat. She also saw a blood stain near the very edge of the canopy, as if someone who had been injured had fallen there before disappearing overboard. Emily could not remain indifferent to this discovery and hastened to report the strange sighting to the staff of the liner. George Smith was a cheerful, inquisitive, and bright young man. He was born in the small town of Greenwich, Connecticut, and his childhood was a happy one, filled with the joy and support of his family, which came first for George. He always maintained a close relationship with his parents and his sister, Bree. His father, George Smith Sr., owned a liquor store and ran it himself. The family business was not just a job for him, but a true passion. In 2000, the younger George Smith successfully completed his higher education in business at Babson College, which is located in Massachusetts. After graduation, he worked for several years in Boston as a computer data mining analyst. However, his heart has always belonged to the family business. After making an informed decision, George decided to return home to help his parents run the store under his father's guidance. He was going to learn the ins and outs of the family business so that he could take over the store in the future and allow his parents to enjoy a well-deserved vacation. In 2002, at one of his reunions with friends, George Smith met a girl who became his life partner. Jennifer was also a Connecticut native and had just received a job offer as an elementary school teacher. She was bright, beautiful, and ambitious, just like George himself. The young couple were completely infatuated with each other, and George's parents were also delighted with his chosen partner. 3 years later, in 2005, when George was 26 years old, the couple decided to get married and start a new chapter of their lives. They celebrated their wedding at the Castle Hill Inn, located in the picturesque town of Newport, Rhode Island, and the ceremony itself took place on the ocean front. It was a location perfect for such an important event in their lives. Immediately after the ceremony, the newlyweds went on a honeymoon, choosing a cruise on a luxury liner, one of the grand ships of the Royal Caribbean Fleet. The 12-day tour involved sailing the beautiful waters of the Asian Sea. Their journey began in Barcelona on June 29th and included stops along the French Riviera and the Italian coastline. George and Jennifer soon befriended another couple and a young man named Josh Asen from California. The 20-year-old Josh, a man with a lively sense of humor, quickly won over George's friendship, and the lively group enjoyed spending time together. On the 1st of July, when the cruise ship departed the Italian coast, they decided to go ashore and have fun all day. On July 4th, the young people explored the island, walked through the narrow streets of the old town, swam in the crystal-clear sea, and savored the local cuisine and cozy taverns. Happy and cheerful, they relished each other's company and the enchanting ambiance of this beautiful place. Mykonos left indelible memories in their hearts, and they planned to continue the evening's enjoyment together on the deck of the ship after a romantic dinner. George and Jennifer met up with their friends again on the cruise ship. The merry group decided to come together and have an enjoyable, memorable experience in this exotic part of the world. The evening was filled with laughter and excitement. After indulging in delicious appetizers and drinks, the newly married couple, accompanied by Josh Askin, went to have fun at the casino on the ship. George and Josh enjoyed sitting at the craps table, and they were entertained during the game, while Jennifer played at the poker table. By the end of the evening, the newlyweds had lost a considerable amount of money. Without regret, they joked about the loss, as it was their honeymoon after all. After the casino closed, apparently the friends decided to continue their night out. The last video of George was recorded around 2:30 a.m. on one of the liner's many security cameras. The footage showed him leaving the casino, but that did not mean George would return to his cabin. In the early morning hours of June 5, 2005, on the Greek island of Mykonos, a mysterious plot began to unfold. George Smith, a 26-year-old newlywed who was on a Mediterranean cruise with his wife Jennifer, disappeared last night. George was reportedly having an active time enjoying the liner's atmosphere of fun and luxury. Everything seemed harmless that night, but the sequel turned out to be much darker. The captain of the ship examined the cabin under the window of which strange footprints had been found, as well as the place on the deck. There was no one in the cabin, and the available footprints and evidence indicated that something serious had happened. The possible disappearance of the newlyweds was related to violence. The news quickly reached all the liner visitors. There was alarm aboard the ship, and passengers were disturbed by the strange events. Deck 7 was cordoned off, and no one was let in or out of their cabins. The ship's crew thoroughly checked every possible establishment on the liner in hopes of finding the missing George and Jennifer. After the discovery of blood, the newlyweds were presumed to have mysteriously disappeared. Taking the situation into his own hands, the senior officer headed to their stateroom to get to the bottom of what was going on. From all available traces, it was hypothesized that George might have fallen overboard the ship. Meanwhile, on the other side of the ship, the search for the young couple was still going on. By 10 a.m., Jennifer was found in the ship's spa, where she was having a pre-booked massage session. Her facial expression spoke of deep surprise and concern. She claimed to be unaware of her husband's whereabouts and that she had not seen him since the previous night. Jennifer revealed that when she woke up this morning, her husband wasn't there. At first, it did not seem unusual to her because he had spent the night with friends, and in the morning he was in another cabin, so she did not search for her husband but went for a spa treatment without being bothered by his absence. At noon, Turkish authorities arrived on board to begin an investigation. The ship's captain reassured the anxious passengers and announced that the abnormal events required cooperation with local authorities. He emphasized that it was a necessary measure to clarify the circumstances and expressed hope that the situation would be resolved soon. The police officers began their questioning with the missing man's wife, Jennifer. Her agitated state and apparent lack of information about her husband made her the main suspect. She said that she had not seen George since the previous night, and that men in white uniforms from the Royal Caribbean had shown up at her door, announcing that her husband may have fallen overboard the ship. They also noticed traces of blood on the boat's awning, after which there was no room for doubt that something terrible had happened to George. Investigators scrutinized cabin 962 on the cruise ship. This cabin was a mess, perhaps the result of a hurried search or even a struggle in the bathroom. Small drops of blood were found on the carpet and towel, and there were fingerprints on the balcony railing. Turkish investigators also found 2 small blood stains on the bedding, each about 2 centimeters long. These samples were identified, and the blood belonged to George. All evidence indicated that George had been traumatized inside the cabin before his mysterious disappearance. The investigators' attention was drawn to a chair on the balcony that had been moved, allowing someone to sit next to the railing. Marks on the railing suggested that someone had sat on it. This raised suspicion among many, including the ship's captain, that George might have fallen from the balcony. However, the height of the railing and the presence of blood on the boat's awning and inside the cabin also raised suspicion of a murder that had occurred. Investigators began reconstructing the sequence of events that night, trying to figure out who George was spending time with and what might have led to this tragedy. The investigation was just beginning, but it was already obvious that they were facing a complex and dark story full of mysteries and unexpected twists and turns. When the Turkish authorities entered the ship to begin investigating the disappearance of George Smith, they decided to start by questioning the company of boys with whom the newlyweds had spent time the previous night. The situation remained mysterious, and every detail could be important in solving the mystery. Members of the company revealed that George and Jennifer had consumed an excessive amount of alcohol on the tragic night. According to them, George was heavily intoxicated, and they assisted him in returning to his cabin, where they put him to bed, removed his shoes, and left him alone. They also reported that they were unable to locate Jennifer and assumed that she had returned to the cabin at a later time. However, there are several inconsistencies in Josh Askin's testimony. Specifically, he claimed that he saw Jennifer leave with a casino employee named Lloyd. Josh believed they had a passionate connection and did not hide their feelings even in George's presence. But video footage showed that at 3:30 a.m., Jennifer stumbled away, leaving George with her new friends, and Lloyd's keycard data indicated he returned to his cabin at 3:25 a.m., which was confirmed by his girlfriend, whom he woke up upon entering the cabin. These discrepancies raised further questions for investigators and led them to believe that Josh Askin may have had his own motives for withholding important details. The investigation continued, and each new detail added more and more mystery to the story. Greg Rosenberg, a young man of 19, was enjoying a cruise on a minor with his family and friends. In this company were his cousin Zach Rosenberg and a close friend, Rostislav Kaufman. All three, despite their Russian roots, held American passports and lived in New York City. Things began in the casino, where Jennifer and Greg Rosenberg decided to try their luck at poker. The mutual gambling lasted until late at night, and when the casino closed at 2:30 a.m., the group of guys decided to continue the fun together. They headed to the disco, continuing to dance and enjoy alcohol. Lloyd Botha, the casino manager, was also spotted in their company. He joined in the fun as the young men continued their nightly entertainment. Next, the events of the night, as described by the witnesses, begin to diverge as the individual members of the group gradually disperse and return to their cabins. By this time, it was already late at night, and they were visibly intoxicated and rowdy. According to the rules of order on the ship, it was decided to deny service to those who were being loud and behaving inappropriately. When the staff of the liner refused to serve the two drunken visitors, the young people recalled that they had purchased a bottle of absinthe during their walk on the island of Mykonos. However, crews and passengers were forbidden from consuming their own alcohol at a certain point. At a certain point, Josh returns to his cabin, which was on the same deck, to retrieve a special bottle of absinthe that he said he had plans for. As it later turns out, the absinthe was unusually strong, with an alcohol concentration of over 70%, making it one of the strongest drinks available. George decides to help his friend and hides the bottle behind the waistband of his shorts. After 3 in the morning, when the ocean liner had already become completely quiet, an attentive janitor noticed something unusual. A group of young men, including Greg, Zach, Rostislav, Josh, and George, were drinking their bottle of absinthe. This circumstance did not go unnoticed, and it became another element in the investigation. However, it wasn't just the men who were drunk that evening. Jennifer, who had initially appeared relatively sober and calm, began to exhibit noticeable changes in her behavior as the evening progressed. She started to stagger, and at one point, even leaned on the casino manager, Lloyd. The witnesses had varying interpretations of her actions. Some believed she was trying to maintain her balance, while others perceived it as flirtatious behavior. The subsequent events between the young couple also remain unclear. According to the witnesses, there was a conflict between the couple. It is possible that they were simply discussing the previous evening, either jokingly or seriously, but at some point, Jennifer struck George. However, it is unclear whether this was done in a playful manner or out of anger. After that, Jennifer left the disco around 3:30 a.m., appearing intoxicated and unsteady on her feet, leaving George with his new friends. This was a pivotal moment that night. The testimony of staff witnesses proved crucial in uncovering the details of the incident. Jennifer, walking and staggering down the hallway, drew the attention of the janitor, who had earlier observed the young men consuming absinthe. He provided her assistance, helped her to the elevator, and watched her turn right when she reached her deck. However, there was a peculiar discrepancy. Her stateroom was on the left, but she headed in the opposite direction. Jennifer was later found sleeping in the hallway, far from her room. 2 guards and a female duty officer used a wheelchair to get her back to her quarters. When they got there, the clock was already showing 4:52 a.m., but George wasn't there. The curtains on the balcony doors were drawn tightly, and they remained stationary even with the breeze. This raised questions. Was George able to go out to the balcony on his own after his new friends left him in bed? Deputy Chief of Police Chit Heyman and his wife were resting in a nearby cabin and witnessed the unfolding events. The couple had been asleep for some time, but around 4 a.m., they were suddenly awakened by a noise on their floor. They first heard loud noises from stateroom number 9062, where the newlyweds were staying. Chit Heyman immediately called guest services to report the noise. He also pounded on the wall and yelled to his neighbors, which resulted in a brief silence. Then there was loud talking again, lasting about 3 minutes, and suddenly there was a loud argument on the balcony. Chit and his wife heard someone say, "Good night," several times, as if trying to get people to leave the cabin. This was followed by sounds of moving furniture and finally a loud thud, like an object falling. Chit Heyman decided to investigate and open the door. He saw 3 unidentified men. Other passengers also reported hearing loud noises, like a body hitting the boat's canopy, followed by a woman's scream, but none of the eyewitnesses had definitive proof that a woman was in the cabin at the time. According to witnesses, 4 young men entered the cabin, but only 3 were visible as they exited. The question arose, could one of them have stayed inside, trying to steal money from the newlyweds, who may have had winnings from gambling in the casino? The theory about a failed robbery attempt seems the most plausible. However, there are alibis for the 3 men, Greg, Zach, and Rostislav, who were allegedly in another stateroom just minutes after Chit Heyman saw the 3 unknown men. The key card records for George's stateroom confirmed that the boys entered it at 4:05 a.m. according to their testimony, and that they entered the cabin again was not recorded. Thus, there are several theories as to what may have happened to George Smith. Theory 1. Robbery. The theory of a possible robbery represents one of the main ones. By all appearances, George and Jennifer got drunk fairly quickly that night, but from witnesses' observations, they looked more or less sober when they left the casino at 2:30 in the morning. At 3:30 a.m., however, they were no longer able to return to their cabin on their own, suggesting possible exposure to illegal substances. This theory is supported by the testimony of other casino visitors who claim that George and Jennifer spoke openly about having large sums of money, possibly received as wedding gifts or casino winnings. Different witnesses mentioned different amounts, but they all estimated their wealth to be in the tens of thousands of dollars. Of course, they could have been victims of a robbery. George wore an expensive Breitling watch, and Jennifer owned an expensive engagement ring, which indicated that they were wealthy. Maybe their quarters were turned over looking for that money. The traces of blood on the sheet could probably have come from the kidnapper's attempt to remove George's valuable watch from his wrist. The second theory of events is related to the effects of alcohol and hallucinogens. The captain, upon learning of the drunkenness of the passengers and the footprints on the balcony, concluded that there may have been an unintentional accident, and for example, during the scuffle, George fell overboard. Particular attention is paid to the question of the presence of hallucinations and their potential danger due to the ingestion of absinthe. Experts in the field of toxicology emphasize that everything depends on the concentration of the active substance. Today, this drink is available for sale in many European countries, and its concentration is significantly limited by European Union regulations. This means that in officially sold absinthe, the concentration of thujone is so low that it is not capable of causing hallucinations. However, illegally made absinthe with a much higher concentration can be found on the black market, which in theory can cause hallucinations. This seems unlikely in this case, as the absinthe the Smith couple purchased was bought officially in Europe and could not have caused such effects, according to experts. To achieve hallucinogenic effects using official absinthe would require the consumption of a huge quantity, so large that it would hardly be tolerable for the body and would most likely lead to fatal alcohol intoxication. Thus, the theory about the influence of alcohol and hallucinogens, in this case, seems unlikely and lacks convincing evidence. FBI agents conducted polygraph interviews with several key individuals in this story, including Jennifer and casino manager Lloyd Botha, both of whom passed the polygraph successfully. However, Josh Askin failed the polygraph interview, which may indicate that he had some secrets regarding George's disappearance. But it is also possible that it was the result of special interrogation tactics used to get more information from him. There was also a videotape of 3 guys, including Russians, joking about what had happened. This tape proved to be important evidence, and the FBI agents took it into consideration. One of the unidentified guys on the tape uttered the phrase, "We gave him a lesson in paragliding without a parachute," which may hint at some kind of incident or joke involving George. The George Smith investigation was also influenced by the testimony of Greg Rosenberg, who was among the young men who were in the company of those entertaining that night. He claimed that they ordered food to their cabin that day, which serves as a key alibi for the Russian boys. However, there are contradictions to this claim, as records in the ship's service logs do not support such orders, and the delivery service had been blocked for their cabin the day before. The staff was even instructed not to provide any service to them that night. Greg cannot say for sure which of the cabin's passengers placed the orders. In December 2019, Greg Rosenberg was murdered, and his death also remains unsolved. Police are looking into a possible link between his murder and the death of George Smith. The mysterious appearance of George Smith became a real mystery that cast a shadow on his family, and the situation became more and more complicated. The behavior of the relatives after this tragedy attracted the attention of both the public and law enforcement agencies. The Smith family continued to press the authorities, demanding that the truth and justice be revealed. The case of George's disappearance was transferred from the FBI's Connecticut Regional Office to the FBI's New York office. Their persistence, and more importantly, their ability to get the public's attention through the media, yielded little results in trying to solve this dark secret. The family offered a $100,000 reward for information that could help find and punish those responsible. They also called for a boycott of the shipowner's company, which they believed was trying to cover up the incident to keep profits. The relationship between George's parents and his young wife, Jennifer, became strained after the incident. Jennifer's behavior was scrutinized publicly. She appeared overly composed, cautious in her responses, and her reluctance to provide sufficient information raised suspicion. Jennifer claimed she was following the instructions of FBI agents and acting as directed. The Smith family, in their search for justice and truth, eventually lost faith in Jennifer when she accepted an offer from the judgment to settle the lawsuit independently for $1 million. The family perceived this move as a betrayal and an attempt to escape further allegations against the cruise organizers. The Smith family was disappointed by the lack of transparency in the Turkish authorities' investigation and felt that Jennifer was too quick to accept the offer. They were convinced that Jennifer was hiding something and was not showing the proper interest in finding out what had happened. Jennifer herself claimed that she remembered almost nothing from that night after 2:30 a.m. and was not even aware that the liner staff had found her in the corridor and returned her to her cabin. The Turkish investigation has not satisfied the Smith family and their belief in justice. Skeptical of the official findings, they decided to take justice into their own hands and enlisted the help of an independent forensic scientist, Henry. Lee Henry conducted a series of studies in the cabin and on the balcony, but the work was not included in the official investigation. These investigations could have revealed key information about what had happened and could have confirmed one of the two main versions of events: murder or accident. According to Henry Lee, the height of the balcony makes a fall from it unproven. It could have been the result of a third party pushing George or him being in some insane state. He could have climbed up on the chair by himself and fallen. Nevertheless, the latter version raised many questions and doubts. The expert intended to conduct an experiment to simulate a fall from the balcony, but the company owner of the liner refused this request. George's relatives claimed that this decision was made to hinder their attempts to establish the truth. Henry Lee also conducted investigations in the cabin, on the balcony, and on the boat, but the results of these investigations remained unavailable to the public. At the same time, the FBI stepped in and began conducting their own investigation, but many of their findings and discoveries also remained secret. The FBI's focus was on the 4 young men who spent the night with George, Josh Asen, and the 3 Russians, Greg Zak, Rosenberg, and Rusov Kaufman. Their testimony was largely inconsistent with that of the other witnesses, making the situation strange and confusing. The story of George Smith's disappearance continues to be a deep mystery shrouded in unknown circumstances, with a lengthy investigation and many theories. The Smith family and his loved ones continue to strive to find out the truth. They initially suspected Jennifer, but were then able to be convinced of her innocence and increased the payout amount of the lawsuit against the company. Despite the FBI's efforts and long investigations, they never found out what really happened or where George's body was located. Eventually, the case was closed and the incident was ruled an accident. The FBI determined that there was not enough evidence to continue the investigation. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of John Thomas McGuire. Life in an orphanage is tough. No personal space or privacy, and if you can't defend yourself. Amanda and Anna Marie McClure are luckier. Being 2 makes it easier to fight back, because these bullies only target individuals, so the sisters kept to themselves, hoping their stay in this unpleasant place would be brief until their imprisoned father's situation is resolved. Their father, Larry McClure, was sent to prison. This was widely reported on television and in newspapers for a long time. Time passed, with days turning into weeks and weeks into months. One day, the sisters rescued a newcomer, Meredith, from being bullied. Meredith had been living with her drug-addicted mother, was very thin and frightened, and would flinch at any sound. She came to the house after her mother died of an overdose, and Meredith herself was afraid to call the emergency services, so she lived with her mother's body for a few days. One day, a friend came to visit Meredith's mother, and upon finding her friend dead, called emergency services from a payphone to avoid being involved. Meredith became a friend to the McClure sisters, and the 3 of them grew closer and felt safer together. Amanda and Anna Marie had never told anyone the reason they were there. Meredith had asked about it once, but Anna Marie had brushed it off and blurted out something about a policeman father who had tried to apprehend a dangerous criminal but had been killed on the job. Amanda listened to the story with her eyes wide open, but her sister gave her a look that told her to stay out of it. Impressed by Amanda's father, Meredith told about the sisters' fate to the other students of the orphanage, and in an instant, the sisters turned into real stars. They were respected and envied because most of those who were there had parents who either died from illegal substances or went to prison. Eventually, all the children wanted to be friends with the sisters, and their secluded lifestyle came to an end. Unfortunately, this beautiful life, though in an orphanage, quickly came to an end. It was revealed that the father of Anna Marie and Amanda was not a deceased police officer, but a living criminal serving time in prison for violent sexual acts against a young girl. The sisters' fate then turned into a real hell. However, after some time, they were fortunate. 2 different families decided to adopt the girls almost simultaneously, giving them the opportunity to start a new life. But the connection between them was broken and lost as they were separated. Amanda and Anna Marie could remain in this story only as the children of the rapist, but their adult lives flowed into the most high-profile case in the state of Virginia. Amanda is known to be married to a 38-year-old man named John McGuire. They met when she was already 29 years old. Her adoptive parents even began to worry that Amanda would be alone for the rest of her life, and the lack of a biological family, including the betrayal of her mother, had a negative impact on her psyche. The foster parents breathed a sigh of relief only when Amanda admitted to them that she had a young man with whom they were going to get married. This was the second marriage for John, and he also had 2 sons from his first marriage. Anna Marie, on the other hand, had never been able to build her own family. One could be happy for Amanda. She really could have a strong and loving family. John was an incredibly positive guy. What could be said against it if even with his ex-wife, they had a warm and friendly relationship? After a while, the sisters' father, Larry McClure, was released on parole, settling still in the same Virginia in a mobile home. He made no small effort to find his daughters. The first place he went was to Amanda's foster parents, Guam and Alex. Larry went straight to their house, said hello, introduced himself, said he wanted to see his daughter, and asked for her contact's address and phone number. Outwardly, he looked very bad, even frightening, with deep wrinkles all over his face, huge bags under his eyes, and besides, as it seemed to them, he was not sober. No, he didn't smell of alcohol, and he didn't stagger from side to side on shaky legs, but in general, his behavior was not adequate. Glenn refused Larry's request, but promised that they would be sure to tell Amanda that her biological father was looking for her. Larry had been really freaked out when he'd heard the phrase, biological father, but he'd thanked him and left. Glenn had indeed kept his word. He had told Amanda that her father was free and looking for her. In the back of Amanda's mind, there was a demon who denied everything and advised to send her father to hell, and an angel who advised to give her father, though a criminal, another chance. The angel won, though it was unclear who was better to listen to. First, Amanda called her father. He said he was very happy to hear from her, asked how she was doing, and she told him that she was doing well, married, and feeling happy. Larry was happy for his daughter and suggested that she come over for a joint dinner with her husband. Amanda didn't know if she should visit her father, but it was as if he knew just what to say to convince her. Come on, forget the old grudges. I have lived all these years with only one thought, to see you and Anne Marie. Anna, unlike you, must have missed me. After all, you've already seen her. Amanda wondered. Of course I have. We went on a nature trip with her, had a wonderful time, like a real family, like father and daughter. It was as if those years of separation never happened. She also asked a lot about her. If Amanda didn't know how to deal with her father, she wanted to see her sister who had been separated from her in the orphanage almost 20 years ago, and so she agreed. In the case file, there is no description of their first meeting, but 2 facts are known. Larry lied about Anne Marie at that time, and she lived in North Carolina, which is 186 miles from Virginia, and Larry had never seen or spoken to her. And so father and daughter met. Their meetings led to Larry getting Amanda and John hooked on illegal substances that he brewed himself in his camper. Larry literally used the daughter and son-in-law. Before meeting the father, the financial situation of the couple was stable, but Larry pulled money from them for the production of illegal substances. And when Amanda and John lost their jobs because of their addiction, Larry persuaded John to register because drug addicts received help from the state in the amount of $180, which were still not enough to buy substances and ingredients. That's when Anna Marie appears in the story, and Larry uses her in the same way he gets her hooked on substances and pulls money out of her. Amanda and John find themselves at an impasse. They have no jobs because of huge debts. They lose their house, and the only way to stay afloat is to move into Larry's camper. John's folks at this point still had no idea. He called his parents. His mother was seriously ill at the time, and John informed them that he and Amanda were going on a trip together. That was the last time John's parents heard their son alive. In fact, no trip was planned. Amanda and John moved in with Larry, where they engaged in a small circle of illicit substance use and alcohol consumption. The whole tragedy occurred on Valentine's Day. John, who rarely recovered from the effects of illegal substances, was still madly in love with Amanda and decided to prepare a surprise for her, a festive evening in the family circle. He bought meat and alcohol, cooked a fancy dinner, at which, in addition to his wife, of course, were Larry and Marie under the prolonged influence of the drugs. A terrible madness occurred in the family. Amanda and Larry became much closer than father and daughter. Unfortunately, John couldn't see it coming. Yes, you all thought correctly, the father and daughter considered themselves a couple. Therefore, John was now redundant. During the meal, John spoke many warm words to Amanda, and Larry was extremely anxious about it, and the tension grew. Eventually, Larry interrupted his son-in-law's speech and asked him if he could be completely honest with his wife. The man agreed. Then Larry proposed a game. John's legs were tied, and he was asked to answer honestly all the questions related to his life. At first, the questions were relatively harmless about his childhood, school, university, and so on. But at some point, Larry, under the influence of drugs, began to accuse John of being an undercover FBI agent. And when John denied it, they started beating him up. It ended when John, begging for mercy and covering himself with his children, tried to untie his legs and had a bottle of wine smashed over his head. Yes, it was the same wine he had bought for the family dinner. Larry, Amanda, and Marie tortured John for 2 days and used illegal substances in parallel. Finally, when they had had enough, Amanda pulled a black bag over her husband's head and squeezed it around his neck until he stopped breathing. John was buried in the backyard, after which the family celebrated the engagement of Larry and Amanda. Father and daughter, and naturally it had to be celebrated with a new batch of psychotropic substances and alcohol. On the 3rd day, their psyche went haywire, and they began to see John's ghost, and the ground in which they buried John seemed to them unearthed, as if John was able to get out of there, escape, and report everything to the police. They dug up John's body, checked his pulse, and even his pupils' reaction to flashlight light, even though the body was already in the decomposition stage. But that didn't seem enough to them to prevent John from coming back to life and escaping. They cut his body into pieces with a wood axe and drove an aspen stake into each piece of his body. The remains were reburied in different places and covered with lime to speed up the decomposition process. 3 weeks later, Larry and Amanda were married. Larry changed his name so that no one would know they were related. The new family decided to start a new life. To do this, they moved to Kentucky and agreed to stop using illegal substances. In the rented house, to hide all suspicion from themselves, they even hung a US flag over the door to the house, just like their neighbors did. By this time, John's ex-wife and parents began to worry that he wasn't making contact, and in 2019, John's mother even filed a police report about his disappearance. As for Larry, he failed to notify the police that he had moved from one state to another, and that was against the terms of his probation, which is why he went back behind bars in prison. Larry's psyche finally failed. It's hard to expect anything good when you've been using illegal substances for a long time, mixing them with alcohol, and then at the snap of your fingers, you find yourself in a place where you can't get them. Withdrawal syndrome works, increased nervousness, lack of boundaries between reality and fantasy. It's pretty clear if you marry your own daughter. Larry was pretty sure that the parole violation was just an excuse to dig up the backyard and find the remains of John's body. He urgently needed to contact Amanda or Anna Marie and tell them to have his daughters dig up the body parts and rebury them somewhere far from home. All prisoner calls are always tapped, so the information had to be conveyed in a veiled manner. Larry even prepared a speech and thought of everything in detail, but the problem was that he was denied calls. Finally, he couldn't stand it any longer, called the policeman on duty, and told him he had something to confess. Larry's logic was that if he confessed to the murder before he was charged, he could avoid at least the death penalty. And if he blamed it on his daughters, yeah, that would be even better. The cop didn't believe Larry at first. What murder? What body parts buried in the backyard? What was this lunatic's idea? Why would this junkie dig his own grave? But by law, the man's word had to be verified. At first, the investigator only wanted to formally organize. Yes, there was a statement. Yes, the place was checked. No, nothing was found. But then it turned out that John was actually considered missing, and just in case, a police detachment was sent to Larry's residence. First on the ground, they found traces of the lime that Larry had mentioned, and then all of the criminal's words were confirmed. The McClure sisters were apprehended immediately. Amanda and Anna Marie were in shock and simply could not believe that their father and someone else's husband could confess to such a brutal murder. They were even more shocked when they learned that Larry tried to portray himself as an innocent victim, and in his testimony indicated that it was his daughters who killed John, and he was only an unwitting participant in the crime. Then each member of the family began to try to save their own skin and convince the police that it was just them. In this terrible story, there was an accident. It was especially hard for John's relatives in this situation since his body, in fact, there was no body, only remains. These remains had to be taken from the criminalists, transported to his parents and buried in a closed coffin. It has been mentioned many times that John was a very nice guy, so despite all the difficulties, his parents were able to bury him. Some of his friends helped with money, some with transportation, some with funeral arrangements. John was buried in a Lutheran church on October 25, 2019. On February 15th, the day after Valentine's Day, someone in the McClure family posted a Facebook post on John's behalf that he was leaving on a trip where he would not be able to be in touch for a long time, and asked his friends not to worry about his long absence. This indicated that the crazy family knew that they were going to kill the poor guy soon. So they misled everyone so that the family wouldn't start sounding the alarm. Despite such a brutal crime, for the duration of the trial, Larry and Anda had 6 months added to their sentence for the marriage of a daughter and father, as such marriages are criminalized in the state. The trial began, and Larry was given the floor. The trial went on for a very long time as the defendants flip-flopped back and forth on the decision to kill John. Amanda, who could not tolerate such a long trial, even made a deal with the investigators, where she was promised to be charged with involuntary manslaughter at the next trial. Larry gave a very different speech. When it all started, the four of us bought the ingredients to make illegal substances and went back to my trailer where I started making them. Amanda came up to me and said she wanted to get back at John. The fact is that John, under the influence of the drugs, raped Anna Marie and she got pregnant. And as for me, I had to earn the trust of my daughters. The judge handed down the final verdict, which sentenced Larry McClure to life in prison without parole. When the punishment for Amanda was announced, her adoptive parents were very sorry that they had confessed to their daughter that she was wanted by her father. They had brought her up with freedom of choice all her life, but they did not know that this freedom could have such an impact on her future fate. Amanda said that all this is the fault of her father, who could not survive the feeling of jealousy. Amanda's poor parents asked the judge to consider that if it were not for the negative influence of her father, their adopted daughter would never have gone to such a brutal crime. However, prosecutors viewed the murder as a conspiracy so that Amanda and Larry could be together as a couple.